Hey guys, we're not strolling through a grand castle or charging into a bloody battlefield tonight. Instead, we're tiptoeing into a realm few dare to mention, but everyone smelled. The world of medieval personal hygiene. A place where bathwater was passed down like a family heirloom, where a louse could outlive the chicken in your kitchen, and where if someone smelled nice, you might want to call a priest, because that could be a sign of demonic possession. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's joining this sleepy journey worldwide. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan if you like that gentle background hum, and let's slide softly into tonight's tale. You open your eyes to a crisp spring morning somewhere in the 13th century Europe. You're in a wattle and daub cottage with one tiny window, covered in goat hide or filthy cloth. No curtains, no glass, but plenty of breezes. The first smell isn't coffee or buttered toast. It's a complicated cocktail of hearth smoke, damp grass, 3-day-old sweat, a live chicken, and you. That's just the smell of life here. Not because you're lazy, but because bathing could kill you, seriously. In the Middle Ages, people believed hot water opened your pores, letting in bad vapors, which meant disease and evil spirits. So if you soaked in warm water after a hard day's work, congratulations. You just opened the door for the plague to waltz into your body. Bathing wasn't just dangerous, it was morally suspicious. A person who bathed too often was obsessed with appearances. And in a society where the body was seen as the home of sin, caring about your looks was a slippery slope straight to damnation and possibly pole dancing. So folks played it safe. They didn't bathe. Instead, if they were lucky, they wiped themselves down with cloths soaked in vinegar, wine, or some fancy herbal water. Face, neck, armpits, done. Quick, simple, and less likely to invite demons into your soul. As for clothes, you wore them on repeat. Linen undergarments were the first line of defense. They kept you warm and absorbed sweat. When the linen got too nasty, you washed it. You, however, stayed the same. The medieval motto might as well have been, if the shirt's clean, the person's fine. Laundry was a whole other ordeal. The water was cold. Soap? It existed. Made of animal fat and ashes. Great for scrubbing. It's also great for burning your hands. Some people even use fermented urine because it contains natural ammonia. Yes, you heard that right. Pee. Aged a few weeks, it was shockingly effective. It smelled well, but that's subjective. If you were a noble, lucky you could bathe. But only on special occasions, and it was expensive and theatrical. A giant tub of warm water was prepared. Servants stirred in herbs, sometimes milk. You sat in the middle of the room, soaking like a half-cooked potato. And even then, cleanliness wasn't guaranteed. For villagers, bathing meant rivers or streams. But in winter, when the water felt like the soul of a traitor, most opted for a quick wipe down. Children? Forget it. Filth was expected. They rolled in mud, stuck straws in their hair, and were frequently mistaken for poultry. What's more, body odor wasn't shamed. Everyone had it. Everyone shared the same signature scent: smoke, earth, sweat, a hint of livestock, and the breath of the age. If someone smelled like roses, they were either a saint or had something very suspicious to hide. People used pomanders, scented balls filled with cloves, cinnamon, or ambergris, a waxy substance harvested from whale intestines, to combat the stink. These were worn on belts or tucked in sleeves, masking your natural musk with a medieval cloud of mystery. The wealthy had perfumes, oils, and scented cloths. People experiencing poverty had hope, and everyone else relied on the wind. The belief that everyone smells was comforting enough to carry on. And so, you lived day by day in a world without weekly bath schedules, without sinks, and with zero concept of germs. Hygiene was flexible. A new tunic without porridge stains might count as fresh. And yet, here's the strange thing. Despite not meeting modern standards of cleanliness, people still lived. They worked, loved, had children, fought battles, and sometimes even made it to age 40. It was a miracle for people who bathed twice a year and thought garlic wine could cure the plague. Do you think avoiding showers is a privilege reserved for stressed-out seniors or gamers glued to their chairs? Think again. In the Middle Ages, not bathing wasn't a lazy choice. It was a survival strategy. Bathing wasn't just considered dangerous. It was, in the eyes of many, borderline suicidal. Seriously. In a world where water was believed to open the door to evil spirits, soaking in a tub was the equivalent of sending the plague a formal invitation. Let's go back to 14th century Europe, where the most common health advice wasn't stay hydrated, but don't open your pores unless you want to die. In the medical theory of the time, the human body was believed to have 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Your health depended on a delicate balance between these 4 extremely uncooperative fluids. And what could throw them out of whack? You guessed it, bathing. Hot water, they believed, caused your pores to open, and that let in miasma, the bad air believed to carry all diseases. This noxious atmosphere wasn't just unpleasant. It was blamed for everything from the sniffles to the Black Death. So soaking in warm water was like throwing open every window on your body and shouting, "Come infect me." If someone bathed daily, they might be suspected of witchcraft, or worse, of being French. Medieval folks weren't clueless about cleanliness. They knew dirt could be uncomfortable, but too much cleanliness was believed to strip away your body's natural defenses. Some even believed dirt created a sacred protective layer, like a divine crust shielding them from disease. Medical texts of the time often warned, after a bath, avoid cold drafts, talking too much, and, most importantly, deep thoughts. A freshly bathed body was weak and vulnerable to both external toxins and internal sinful ideas. Frequent bathing wasn't just considered risky to your health, it was morally suspicious. Anyone who pays too much attention to their body must be hiding something. Maybe a witch, maybe a cheater, perhaps a French nobleman is plotting something. Either way, there is not someone to trust. Even for nobles, bathing was a rare and elaborate ritual. A wooden tub would be set in the middle of the room. Servants boiled water, mixed in herbs, and tested the temperature by hand. After soaking for about 15 minutes, they'd towel you off, unless the towel was already in use by the Earl's dog. As for common folk, they bathed when the stars aligned, meaning, when it was warm, there was a nearby stream, no plague, and they felt unusually brave. Most people opted for the dry bath, a quick wipe down with vinegar-soaked cloth, herbs, or whatever smelled stronger than they did. Of course, some people did take bathing seriously. Public bathhouses were common in some cities during the 12th and 13th centuries. Men and women soaked together, chatted, joked, and sometimes engaged in activities that made the church deeply uncomfortable. Once bathhouses were discovered to be not just for hygiene but for temptation, the clergy campaigned hard to shut them all down. Certain monastic orders maintained scheduled bathing, sometimes monthly, sometimes yearly. Monks were encouraged to keep their souls clean, not their bodies. So, if you walked into a monastery and were hit by a scent that resembled fermented holiness, don't be shocked. In many medieval times, people believed they didn't need to bathe to live a long life. And, in some cases, they were right. Those who bathed regularly, especially in cold months, often got sick. Not because of the bathing itself, but because afterward, they had no warm blankets or hair dryers, just a drafty wooden door and the wind. And of course, there was the plague. When the Black Death swept through Europe, people blamed everything: cats, Jews, bad air, and even bathing. Some believed excessive washing made the body more vulnerable to infection. So, if you survived the pandemic, it might have been because you didn't bathe. It sounds absurd now, but in a world that knew nothing of bacteria, viruses, or immunity, dodging water was a strangely rational strategy, at least to a 14th century peasant who'd never heard the word shampoo. So pause for a moment the next time you step into your bathroom, with its hot water, soothing soaps, triple-layered shampoo, and spa playlist. Pay silent tribute to your ancestors. They chose to live without all of it and still managed to live, work, and occasionally not die immediately. You might think public bathhouses were foreign to the Middle Ages, but the opposite is true. Before they were branded as dens of sin and banned by the church, these places were cultural hubs, spaces for relaxation, and essential parts of urban life. If you walked into a 12th century European city, your first sights might include a bustling market, a church bell tower, or a pillory in the town square. But if you turned down a side street, past a few taverns and some runaway chickens, you'd find something more surprising: a public bathhouse. It may sound modern, but it's an ancient tradition. The Romans had long built communal baths, and parts of that legacy lingered for centuries. By the Middle Ages, most major cities, from Paris to Prague, could have bathhouses. While not as luxurious as Roman baths, they were still attractive to everyone, from artisans to nobles. The structure of a medieval bathhouse was simple: a large room with wooden or stone tubs for soaking in hot water. There were dressing areas, drying spaces, and sometimes even massage rooms, offering hand rubs or scrubs with bundled twigs. The staff were often hired servants, ready to fetch water, add herbs, shave beards, or cut hair. And yes, men and women often bathed together. At first, no one found it scandalous. Bathing was seen as a communal activity, much like going to church or grabbing a beer after work. People understood the line between modesty and impropriety, at least in theory. But as bathers lingered longer than necessary, things slowly drifted from the original intent. Bathhouses became discreet meeting spots for lovers, places for shady deals between politicians and merchants, and ideal venues for organized flirting. Some bathhouses added extra services. During the day, it was all hot water and hygiene. But at night, dim lights, wine, and giggles behind the curtains. Historians call it moral decline. Locals called it a convenient combo package. Not everyone was pleased. The church grew alarmed. Where there was exposed skin and hot water, temptation followed. Sermons gradually shifted focus from teaching virtue to cataloging sins committed in the bath. Bathhouses, they claimed, led people astray, making them sinful and pulling them off the righteous path. Some clergy even declared that communal bathing led the soul to ruin. They never clarified whether this applied to the warm water, or just to people who laughed at bare shoulders. Regardless, the authorities began to listen. Many cities ordered bathhouses closed or limited their hours. Others banned men and women from bathing simultaneously, unless married. And as you know, no one brings their spouse to relax in a hot bath. Aside from morality, health concerns also played a role. When the plague struck in the 14th century, people panicked. As always, bathhouses became scapegoats. It was believed that gathering in warm water disrupted bodily humor, allowed toxic vapors to cling to the skin, and invited all kinds of disasters. They forgot about washing towels, changing water, or keeping things clean. Instead, they shut it down and advised folks to stay home and wipe it off with vinegar. For many, the disappearance of bathhouses was a real loss. Not just because they liked being clean, but because those places were once social spaces. In bathhouses, people shared stories, gossiped, recited poetry, and sang. Kids learned to swim, elders soaked their feet, and rowdy youths dared each other to withstand the heat. It was like a restaurant, tea house, and hot tub rolled into one. Of course, not every bathhouse was a den of vice. Some areas maintained proper bathing traditions. Certain Eastern European cities, especially in Hungary and Poland, kept gender-separated facilities with clear rules and strict oversight. But people are people, and where there's rising steam, there's always a little secret hidden behind the mist. Eventually, public bathhouses faded from the hygiene map of Europe, partly due to social pressure, partly from fear of disease, and partly because hot water became harder to come by during colder climates. People returned to drying towels, the occasional warm basin at home, or simply gave up on the idea of bathing altogether. Soap began to replace bathhouses, and with that, the era of communal bathing quietly slipped into the past. But if you ever thought medieval people didn't care about cleanliness, remember, there was a time when entire cities flocked to a shared bathtub. They weren't afraid of water. They feared what came with it: judging stares, sleepy sermons, and the risk of being scolded for too long beside a stranger tattooed with charcoal and ash. If you think medieval nobles lived in gold-plated palaces, dined off golden platters, slept on silk sheets, and soaked daily in porcelain tubs sprinkled with Himalayan salt, prepare to have your fantasy slightly shattered. Yes, they had bathtubs. But before you picture a lazy princess lounging in a bubble bath with scented candles, you should know that bathing for the upper class was more like simmering yourself in a very expensive soup. Bathing in the Middle Ages was a rare privilege, especially if you were rich. But that didn't mean they bathed often. Nobles only bathed when necessary, or forced by a wedding, a royal banquet, or a visit from a cardinal with a sensitive nose. A noble's bathtub was usually a large wooden barrel lined with cloth or fur placed right in the bedroom. There were no private bathrooms and no drainage systems. Preparing a bath was practically a mini-event. Servants had to heat water in giant copper cauldrons, then carry it in bucket by bucket. It took 10 to 20 buckets, not counting the herbs, milk, honey, or flower petals added if the bather felt poetic. Picture a count soaking pensively in steaming water, wearing a nightcap, 2 servants fanning the water with goosefeather fans to cool it slightly, another stirring it to prevent scum from forming, and one more standing by with a towel. It didn't look like a spa. It looked more like a deluxe human hot pot. For noblewomen, things were even more elaborate. The room would be strewn with herbs to mask the damp smell. Candles lit the space around the tub. Water was poured through fabric pouches filled with lavender, rosemary, or dried rose petals. After bathing, their wrong hair had to air dry for 3 hours. Since hairdryers hadn't been invented, stepping into the cold breeze was considered a death sentence. Such baths were not cheap. The sheer amount of clean water, firewood, and labor made bathing a luxury. Some estimated that a single noble's bath costs as much as a peasant family's weekly food. So the rich found a more efficient solution. Wear layers of perfumed clothing and use fragrance to ignore the reality. Of course, they'd never admit that. In letters and journals, nobles described bathing as a sacred ritual, purifying the mind and liberating the soul. But no one wrote about stepping into a half-scrubbed wooden tub, angel eye states, or the cat scratching the new towel. Some things were best left unwritten. Beyond full baths, nobles often practiced spot cleaning. They used cloths dipped in scented water to wipe their face, hands, neck, and any skin that showed. The rest, out of sight, out of mind. As for the smell, that's what pomanders, perfume oils, and overly polite maids were for, even if those maids were praying daily for a new employer. Interestingly, many nobles believed they were cleaner than commoners, simply because they bathed in flower water and sat in tubs with brass trim. They didn't realize that reusing the same bath water, drying off with a towel hung up last month, and putting on old clothes wasn't much different from wallowing in fragrant denial. There were, of course, exceptions. Queen Isabeau of France was said to love bathing so much she had a private bath built in the palace, complete with hot water pipes from the kitchen. That was like installing central air conditioning in a battlefield tent at the time. People admired it, and whispered that she was hiding something unpleasant. Still, those cases were rare. Most nobles maintained the image of cleanliness by not looking too closely. If the dress still smelled nice, the hair was smooth, and the lipstick held up, who would question it? After bathing, nobles would apply scented oils or powders. Some were made from dried flowers, others from flour mixed with fragrances. Whether it smoothed the skin was debatable, but the glow and deodorize effect was undeniable. This created a strange reality. Medieval nobility were obsessed with appearances yet afraid of water. They liked looking clean, but worried that too much bathing would weaken the body or wash away the inherited nobility they believed clung to their skin. So if you ever time travel to a 14th century castle party, bring perfume. And if you're invited to use your host's bathtub, be sure to ask, is the water fresh? What herbs are in it? And has any rat swum through it this week? If you've ever seen a historical drama where a peasant steps out of a stream with dripping hair, golden sunlight filtering through the mist, sorry to break it to you, but that's not reality. Bathing in a medieval village wasn't romantic and didn't involve warm lighting, silk towels, or floral scents. You got cold water, a moldy wooden bucket, and the occasional chicken sticking its head in to check on you. You're a 14th century peasant. Each day begins before sunrise, spent in the fields until your hands shake from the cold or crack from the sun, and ends up on a straw bed surrounded by chickens, a few turnips, and a child muttering in their sleep. If it happens at all, personal hygiene must squeeze into these hectic slivers of time. In such conditions, bathing was never a priority, especially in winter, when water in a bucket could freeze overnight. Stripping down to bathe was essentially challenging fate. Who wants to shiver half naked when there's still cow dung to shovel? Summer made things a little more doable. People could bathe in nearby streams or rivers. That was real bathing, but still full of hazards. Cold currents, slippery rocks, and the risk of being seen with barely any clothes on often gave folks second thoughts. Bathing outdoors also meant sharing space with cows, ducks, and whatever else wandered by. What about bathing indoors? Water might be heated and poured into a wooden tub on rare occasions, childbirth, weddings, or major holidays. One person would bathe, using up some of the water. Then, the next would get in. Often the whole family shared one tub. The first bather felt clean. The last just hoped not to catch scabies. If there was no special reason to bathe, people opted for a simpler method, wiping down with cloths. These were usually made of linen or hemp, soaked in warm water if available, and used to clean the face, neck, and any frequently visible skin. The rest was left to time and the mercy of the Lord. In some regions, people practiced scrubbing with sand, fireplace ash, or even dry sawdust. The goal was to use abrasives to remove dirt. It wasn't very effective, but at least it felt like an effort. Afterward, people would apply oil or animal fat to the skin to keep it from drying out, and to mask the smell. This natural deodorizing approach was taken seriously. People used fragrant herbs like sage, mugwort, or rosemary, stuffing them into cloth pouches hung around the house or tucked into collars. Before going to market or church, they might sprinkle themselves with vinegar infused with herbs. It didn't erase body odor, but it did show you were trying. Clothing played a role in hygiene too. People wore linen undergarments to absorb sweat and dirt, with thick woolen layers on top for warmth and protection from the rain. Undergarments were washed periodically by hand, using river water, ash, and fermented urine. Yes, you read that correctly. Urine contains ammonia, a natural cleanser. It was effective, free, and required only a strong stomach. Children were rarely given full baths. They grew up in dirt, dust, sweat, and scolding. Washing them usually meant a quick wipe down with a damp rag, or a face rinse with watered-down yogurt or rice water. Newborns were rubbed with sheep fat to keep them warm, a physical and symbolic layer of protection. In the home, mothers typically managed the bathing schedule. She decided who bathed when, whether the water would be warm, and who had to wait. Bathing in a tub meant everyone had to follow a tight timeline. Otherwise, the water would cool or evaporate before it was their turn. Interestingly, despite bathing infrequently, peasants had a strong communal understanding of scent acceptance. Everyone had a smell, so no one judged. The scent of hearth smoke, hay, soil, and people blended into a raw, earthy symphony. If someone smelled noticeably nice, people might assume they had just stolen something, or recently gotten married. Some villages had a tradition of community bath days. Once a month, often on a holiday, locals would gather at the big stream. Children splashed in the water. Adults bathed slowly, chatted, told ghost stories, or gossiped about who'd just had a baby. No one was shy. Everyone was in the same boat. The only difference might be who brought mugwort leaves to scrub with and who just used their hands. In the end, medieval peasant hygiene was a mix of instinct, environment, weather, and a bit of folk wisdom. They weren't fragrant or spotless by modern standards, but weren't completely indifferent either. They did what they could, and in a world without showers, they managed to live, work, fall in love, and occasionally even shave their legs. Before there were bathtubs, showers, and hundreds of body scrubs smelling like coconut, vanilla, or Christmas cookies, and people had to get creative with whatever was at hand. And sometimes, they had a cloth rag, a bowl of cloudy water, and a fierce determination not to stink in public. This is the tale of the dry bath, a cleansing ritual where cleanliness was measured more by effort than by outcome. Dry bathing, or simply wiping oneself down, was one of the most common hygiene methods in the Middle Ages. The reason was simple. Clean water wasn't always available, the weather wasn't always warm, and boiling buckets of water just to catch a cold didn't appeal to anyone. So, people opted for something gentler, cheaper, and less hazardous to their bodily humors. The main tool, a small piece of linen. It might be an old towel, a ripped shirt fragment, or, if you were lucky, a hand-sewn square made by your mother. This cloth was dipped in warm water with vinegar, herbal infusions, or, for the well-off, diluted wine scented with flowers. No soap suds, no artificial fragrances, just spirit and a sense of temporary reassurance. Wiping usually starts with the face, neck, armpits, and hands. Then came the legs, and, if one was particularly motivated, the nether regions. Medieval people believed that cleaning the frequently visible parts was enough. They relied on linen, modesty, and a comfortable social distance for everything else. Some had their secret wipe-down recipes. Some boiled herbs like mugwort, sage, or rosemary let the water cool into what they called holy cleansing water. Others mixed vinegar and salt for its disinfectant properties. Some even used water steeped with fireplace ash or tree roots, creating concoctions with questionable hues but legendary reputations. Dry bathing wasn't just a hygiene act. For many, it was a humble ritual, like attending church or embroidering handkerchiefs. Mothers taught daughters to fold a cloth to clean more while avoiding cross-contamination. Fathers passed down tips for dry shaving using rainwater and a steady hand. Each generation added a new trick, an old formula, or a chilling cautionary tale about when someone used fermented urine instead of herbal rinse. In better-off households, the wipe-down came with accessories. A sprinkle of scented powder after drying off. A small sachet of herbs tucked into clothing. A jar of oil for elbows, knees, or any spot that looked like it might crack open. These weren't common, but you were the best-smelling person for miles if you had them. Dry bathing had the bonus of speed. No boiling water, no full undressing, and no risk of cramping from soaking your feet in freezing water. You could wipe down in 10 minutes, then return to the fields or continue weaving without missing a beat. For breastfeeding mothers or older people with limited mobility, this was often the only practical option for staying clean. Some combined dry bathing with sun drying. After wiping down, they'd sit in the courtyard to let the sun finish the job, then get dressed again. On a good day, this gave the same refreshing feeling as a modern spa. On a gloomy day, it mostly gave you chills and a vague sense that something had gone wrong. In monasteries, where bathing was often restricted, dry bathing became a survival skill. Monks were issued cleansing cloths and given strict usage schedules. Some had to clean themselves while fully clothed to preserve modesty. Cleanliness was always tied to faith, patience, and the ability to maneuver in tight spaces. Children learned the art early. Mothers would distract them with ghost stories while wiping their hands with warm cloths, often warning them of lice that attacked dirty necks. Older kids learned to clean themselves with rainwater stored in clay jars or herbal teas. Some families even held family wipe-down hours, where everyone sat in a circle, washing and chatting. A special family gathering no one wanted unexpected guests to witness. Some elevated dry bathing to an art form. They had weekly schedules. Monday for face and neck, Tuesday for arms and armpits, Wednesday for legs, and Sunday for a full-body recap if time allowed. It saved water and energy and, most importantly, gave a sense of order in a chaotic world. Dry bathing wasn't perfect. It didn't remove all dirt, it didn't fluff your hair, and it didn't feel like being hugged by warm steam. But for medieval people, it was a balance of practicality, faith, and folk ingenuity. They didn't have fancy soap or deluxe towels, but they had determination, linen cloths, and a simple belief that if you tried hard enough, you could be clean. Your way. If you think dry shampoo is a modern invention, you've never seen a medieval lady use fireplace ash and beer to beautify her hair. Yes, hair was still considered a natural crown in a world with no salons, no collagen hair masks, and no negative ion steam caps. It wasn't always fragrant or silky, but it was almost always a source of pride. Hair, in the medieval world, was a statement. It revealed your class, morals, marital status, and sometimes even mood. A noblewoman might hide her entire face, but her hair had to be well maintained. While people didn't bathe often, hairbrushing was a daily ritual, sometimes lasting hours, and required the same patience as knitting by candlelight on a stormy night. The main grooming tool was a carved wooden or bone comb for detangling and lice hunting. Yes, lice were a daily reality. No one was shocked to find them in their hair. A successful hairbrushing session usually included the ceremonial squishing of at least one unfortunate louse between two fingers. In addition to combs, people used oils. Not argan oil or ultra-smooth serum, but animal fats, goose fat, sheep tallow, or, for the wealthy, almond oil. These were worked into the hair to add shine and help with styling. That sticky feeling afterward? Not a problem. You were clearly doing something right if you were shinier than everyone else. Washing hair wasn't frequent. Washing required heated water mixed with fireplace ash, lye, root extracts, or herbal brews. Some even used beer. The yeast helped soften and detangle the hair. After washing, hair was dried with linen cloths and either sun-dried on nice days or patience-dried when cold. Long hair was the standard. Women rarely cut their hair unless they joined a convent or were punished. Long hair was braided, wrapped atop the head, or tucked into veils. Clean, lengthy locks symbolized femininity, modesty, and maternal virtue. For men, hair mattered too. A neat haircut meant you weren't a vagabond, and a bit of grease made you look like someone who had survived 3 good harvests. In monasteries, shaved heads symbolized renouncing worldly life, but that didn't mean monks ignored hair entirely. The remaining fringe was often brushed with solemn care. Some even dusted their scalps with ash to combat odor, and routinely checked for lice hiding beneath their robes. Children's hair was short and wild. Brushing their hair was the job of mothers or older sisters. Well-behaved kids sat quietly to have scented powder sprinkled on them. The unruly ones got their hair chopped with garden shears. Whatever kept the forehead visible was good enough. In some rural areas, herbal hair dye was a thing. Mulberry leaves, walnut husks, or charcoal were mashed into dark pastes to deepen hair color. Elderly folks used powdered bark or mugwort root to hide gray hairs, not always effective, but taken very seriously. During festivals, hair care became an art. Women braided their hair into floral shapes, tied ribbons, added feathers, and even pinned coins. Men slicked back their hair and shaved the nape of their necks to show off a well-kept look. Children were spritzed with homemade daisy and vinegar water to appear momentarily fragrant. Unspoken rules governed hair etiquette. Messy hair suggested illness or mental instability. Overly glossy hair raised suspicions. You might be up to something scandalous. Change your hairstyle too often. The church congregation will discuss you during Sunday service. In medieval art, hair was painted as golden waves or soft brown curls, though reality was rarely so flattering. Hair in paintings had no lice, no grease, and never needed drying time. But in real life, maintaining beautiful hair took effort and skill that rivaled any modern beauty regimen. Hair in the Middle Ages was both an honor and a responsibility. A good head of hair could elevate your social status, or at least earn you a seat closer to the fire at the winter feast. It was something you couldn't hide, couldn't replace, and absolutely couldn't neglect. So next time your hair's a mess, your shampoo's gone, your comb's missing, and it's pouring rain, just remember, you're still doing better than a 13th century European peasant trying to detangle her hair by hand while a chicken pecks at her skirt. The comb was the most delicate weapon in the hygiene arsenal in a world without conditioner, no scalp massages at the salon, and no 3-step hair repair treatments. It wasn't just for brushing hair. It was a lice-hunting tool, a family heirloom, a symbol of patience, and sometimes a fragile hope that your hair may be less tangled today. Medieval combs were often made of wood, bone, or brass, with fine, double-sided teeth. One side smoothed the hair. The other, with tighter teeth, was was designed to track down unwelcome guests. Lice, nits, and occasionally mysterious specks of dust from who knows where. Most families owned only one or two good combs. These were carefully preserved, hung on the wall, or stored in wooden boxes, like small, sacred objects that brought utility and a strange sense of peace. Hairbrushing wasn't private. It was a communal act. Mothers brushed their daughters' hair. Sisters brushed each other's. Wives brushed their husbands' hair after a long day in the fields. The act was nurturing, connecting, and calming. On long winter nights, a comb gliding through hair joined the familiar crackle of firewood and the wind whispering through mud brick walls. Every hairbrushing session was a gentle battle. The brusher needed skill. Too rough and it hurt. Too soft, and the knots remained. You had to know when to stop and when to part the hair and pretend you were done just to prevent tears. Yes, lice were a daily reality. No one was shocked to find them in their hair. A successful hairbrushing session usually included the ceremonial squishing of at least one unfortunate louse between two fingers. In addition to combs, people used oils. Not argan oil or ultra-smooth serum, but animal fats, goose fat, sheep tallow, or, for the wealthy, almond oil. These were worked into the hair to add shine and help with styling. That sticky feeling afterward? Not a problem. You were clearly doing something right if you were shinier than everyone else. Washing hair wasn't frequent. Washing required heated water mixed with fireplace ash, lye, root extracts, or herbal brews. Some even used beer. The yeast helped soften and detangle the hair. After washing, hair was dried with linen cloths and either sun-dried on nice days or patience-dried when cold. Long hair was the standard. Women rarely cut their hair unless they joined a convent or were punished. Long hair was braided, wrapped atop the head, or tucked into veils. Clean, lengthy locks symbolized femininity, modesty, and maternal virtue. For men, hair mattered too. A neat haircut meant you weren't a vagabond, and a bit of grease made you look like someone who had survived 3 good harvests. In monasteries, shaved heads symbolized renouncing worldly life, but that didn't mean monks ignored hair entirely. The remaining fringe was often brushed with solemn care. Some even dusted their scalps with ash to combat odor and routinely checked for lice hiding beneath their robes. Children's hair was short and wild. Brushing their hair was the job of mothers or older sisters. Well-behaved kids sat quietly to have scented powder sprinkled on them. The unruly ones got their hair chopped with garden shears. Whatever kept the forehead visible was good enough. In some rural areas, herbal hair dye was a thing. Mulberry leaves, walnut husks, or charcoal were mashed into dark pastes to deepen hair color. Elderly folks used powdered bark or mugwort root to hide gray hairs. Not always effective, but taken very seriously. During festivals, hair care became an art. Women braided their hair into floral shapes, tied ribbons, added feathers, and even pinned coins. Men slicked back their hair and shaved the nape of their necks to show off a well-kept look. Children were spritzed with homemade daisy and vinegar water to appear momentarily fragrant. Unspoken rules governed hair etiquette. Messy hair suggested illness or mental instability. Overly glossy hair raised suspicions. You might be up to something scandalous. Change your hairstyle too often. The church congregation will discuss you during Sunday service. In medieval art, hair was painted as golden waves or soft brown curls, though reality was rarely so flattering. Hair in paintings had no lice, no grease, and never needed drying time. But in real life, maintaining beautiful hair took effort and skill that rivaled any modern beauty regimen. Hair in the Middle Ages was both an honor and a responsibility. A good head of hair could elevate your social status, or at least earn you a seat closer to the fire at the winter feast. It was something you couldn't hide, couldn't replace, and absolutely couldn't neglect. So next time your hair's a mess, your shampoo's gone, your comb's missing, and it's pouring rain, just remember, you're still doing better than a 13th century European peasant trying to detangle her hair by hand while a chicken pecks at her skirt. The comb was the most delicate weapon in the hygiene arsenal in a world without conditioner, no scalp massages at the salon, and no 3-step hair repair treatments. It wasn't just for brushing hair. It was a lice hunting tool, a family heirloom, a symbol of patience, and sometimes a fragile hope that your hair may be less tangled today. Medieval combs were often made of wood, bone, or brass, with fine, double-sided teeth. One side smoothed the hair. The other, with tighter teeth, was designed to track down unwelcome guests. Lice, nits, and occasionally mysterious specks of dust from who knows where. Most families owned only one or two good combs. These were carefully preserved, hung on the wall, or stored in wooden boxes, like small, sacred objects that brought utility and a strange sense of peace. Hairbrushing wasn't private. It was a communal act. Mothers brushed their daughters' hair. Sisters brushed each other's. Wives brushed their husbands' hair after a long day in the fields. The act was nurturing, connecting, and calming. On long winter nights, a comb gliding through hair joined the familiar crackle of firewood and the wind whispering through mud brick walls. Every hairbrushing session was a gentle battle. The brusher needed skill. Too rough and it hurt. Too soft, and the knots remained. You had to know when to stop and when to part the hair and pretend you were done just to prevent tears. Some people dusted hair with ash powder or herbal dust to reduce friction. Others applied fat to help the comb glide, accepting stickiness in exchange for less agony. And then came the lice patrol. No one liked it, but everyone accepted it. When you spotted tiny eggs clinging to the roots, felt an itch at the nape, or heard scratching in the night, it was time for the comb to fulfill its noble duty. The teeth moved row by row, patrolling like silent guards. When a louse was caught, it was pinched between two fingernails and dealt with, usually with a swift, satisfying snap. Children hated hairbrushing. They squirmed, whined, negotiated, and invented every excuse. But no one escaped once the comb was in a mother's hand. After about 10 minutes of protest, they usually went limp, resting their heads and surrendering to fate. Meanwhile, the mother carried on, the patient as a blacksmith forging one last blade before dawn. For adults, brushing was a chance to talk. People shared village gossip, crop news, and local scandals, or simply sat in peaceful silence, enjoying the soothing rhythm of their scalps. Sometimes, 10 minutes of combing was all it took to calm anger, soften sorrow, or lull someone into sleep right where they sat. Combs were also gifts. A young man might carve his name into a wooden comb and give it to his beloved. A wife might carry her mother's comb as a keepsake. A soldier stationed far away might send his wife a comb made of foreign wood with a note. Even if your hair is tangled, I still want to be the one who untangles it. In monasteries, combs were used on schedule. Monks could comb their hair on Tuesday mornings and Friday evenings. The combs were scrubbed with lye water or vinegar. A clean head was considered part of a clean soul, though some believed it was the best way to avoid catching lice from your bunkmate. And what if the hair was too tangled? If combing failed, more oil was added, strokes slowed down, or the hair was cut. But cutting was a last resort, almost a public admission of defeat. People tried everything before taking that brave step. If someone had to chop off a braid, they were often comforted with a honey cake and the promise, "It'll grow back soon." The comb was symbolic, too. In folklore, losing a comb was a bad omen. If someone dropped their comb on a full moon, it was said trouble would come, usually in love. A broken comb meant something in your life needed changing. Some even buried their comb under the pillow to keep nightmares away. No one could prove it worked, but everyone felt better knowing the comb was exactly where it should be. The comb became an indispensable part of daily life from a simple tool. It was tied to hair, to time, the smell of oil, laughter, and sometimes the quiet tears of a particularly tangled evening. It was an object, a ritual, a silent whisper that said, "I'm still trying to live like a human being." Suppose you've ever woken up with morning breath strong enough to send the cat fleeing from your bed? Well, congratulations. You're still luckier than most people living in the 14th century Europe. In the Middle Ages, oral hygiene wasn't a daily routine. It was an adventure, a test of courage, and sometimes an act of faith. In a world without toothbrushes, toothpaste, mouthwash, or licensed dentists, people turned to forests, fields, and fireplaces to keep their mouths from becoming biological weapons. Instead of brushing, they chewed. People used chew sticks, small twigs from aromatic plants like clove, cinnamon, or rosemary. The end of the twig was frayed by chewing until it resembled a mini broom, which was then used to scrub the teeth. No minty foam, no refreshing tingle, just the taste of wood, a hint of dirt, and the solid crunch of a decade's worth of tartar. Beyond chew sticks, people used coarse salt. A pinch of rock salt, sometimes mixed with ashes or powdered herbs, was rubbed directly onto the teeth using a finger or cloth. It helped scrape off buildup, but also scraped gums, caused bleeding, and felt like brushing with construction sand. Charcoal was another go-to. Ground into powder, it was applied with a stick or finger and scrubbed onto teeth. It did help whiten, but without thorough rinsing, you could walk out looking like a knight who just face-planted into a fire pit. Still, many preferred a coal smile over breath that could drop a horse. For those concerned about breath, there were natural solutions. People chewed mint leaves, fennel seeds, or dried orange peel. Some kept cloves in their mouth all morning to mask odors. The wealthy might rinse with diluted wine infused with herbs, antiseptic and aristocratic. People experiencing poverty used warm salt water, or nothing, and simply hoped the wind would blow their words in the opposite direction. Dentists back then were a far cry from today's professionals. No white coats, no reclining chairs, and no soothing music. They were often barbers, healers, or in urgent cases, a neighbor with strong arms and iron tongs. Tooth extraction was done in markets, barns, or sunny courtyards, where at least the light helped avoid pulling the wrong tooth. Anesthesia was a fantasy. Remedies included strong alcohol, prayer, or biting down on a stick. Some believed that the pain would ease if you closed your eyes, clenched your fists, and thought of God. But records suggest this didn't stop the screams echoing from one end of the village to the other whenever a molar saw daylight. People didn't understand tooth decay. Many believed literal worms lived in teeth, so-called tooth worms. Treatments included smoking the worm, rubbing spices on the gums, slapping your face a few times, and hoping for divine intervention. The methods were hazy, but the faith was strong. Others believed in charms. Small crosses were pressed against aching cheeks in some regions, or animal bone amulets were worn around the neck to bind the pain. In times of despair, people prayed to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of bad teeth and fraying spirits. Her statue often stood in kitchen corners, with rosemary tucked at its base as a humble plea for relief. False teeth were extremely rare. If you lost a tooth, you simply lived without it. Elders chewed slowly, chopped food finely, or stuck to soft meals. Some made dentures from wood or bone, but they rarely lasted and often fell out mid-feast. One gentleman reportedly joked, "My teeth spend more time under the table than in my mouth." He was never invited to dinner again. Oral hygiene also reflected social class. The wealthy may not have had white teeth, but their breath was more pleasant thanks to homemade oils and rinses. People experiencing poverty had stronger teeth from coarse food, but their breath could make someone reconsider their life choices. Either way, keeping the conversation at a distance was generally wise. Yet one thing is undeniable. Despite their lack of science and modern tools, medieval people were incredibly inventive. There were no electric toothbrushes, but they had aromatic twigs. No peppermint toothpaste, but they had salt, ash, and a grit that wasn't just physical. So next time you're holding your toothbrush, wondering if you can skip just one day, remember your ancestors, who brushed with charcoal, pulled teeth with tongs, and whispered prayers every time they smiled too wide. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself a little more grateful for that minty rinse and battery-powered brush in your hand. If you've ever complained about running out of toothpaste in the middle of the night, try picturing a medieval villager standing before a pile of cold ashes, clutching an eggshell, mouth reeking after 3 days of salted fish, muttering to themselves, "Today I shall clean my teeth, no matter the cost." And then, they begin mixing a concoction you wouldn't dare try even once. Toothpaste, as we know, didn't exist in the Middle Ages. The closest thing was a collection of DIY pastes, each household, region, and grandmother boasting their formula. Some came from folk wisdom, some came from wild inspiration, and some made you question how anyone still believed in taste or life. The most common ingredient was ash. People scooped it straight from the hearth, ideally avoiding bits of grease or bug corpses, and ground it fine. Ash offered mild abrasiveness, helping remove plaque and brighten teeth. But overuse could erode enamel, and if swallowed, your breakfast would taste like burnt wood for the rest of the day. Next came salt. Coarse rock salt, about the size of black beans, was crushed and mixed into the ash for its disinfecting properties. The result was a gritty, salty paste that felt like brushing your teeth with beach sand during a sleepless night. But to medieval folks, bleeding gums were a fair price for a confident grin, even in the dark. Some went a step further, adding crushed eggshells. The calcium, they believed, strengthened teeth. Others tossed in charcoal, resulting in a mouth so black it looked like you'd bitten into an ink pot. Still, everyone agreed. Your teeth did look whiter afterward, even if your smile caused passing children to cry. The fancier recipes included herbs like mint, rosemary, or mugwort. The wealthy might add rosewater or tree resin to mask the smell. But overall, brushing wasn't about freshness. It was about feeling like you did something responsible before eating rock-hard bread for dinner. As for tools, there were many. Some used fingers, others cloth, and the more meticulous used twigs carved to a point, dipped into their homemade powder. There were no set brushing schedules. Some people did it weekly, others only on holidays, and some proudly believed their breath was part of their personality. Many believed brushing was only necessary before meeting a priest, arranging a marriage, or visiting someone's home. On such special occasions, they'd upgrade to a power formula, often spiked with diluted wine, vinegar, or even urine for deep cleaning. Yes, urine. It contains natural ammonia, and the kind of questionable solution sounded oddly logical in a time without labs or regulations. While they knew nothing of bacteria, medieval people understood that a cleaner mouth meant fewer aches and better eating. They didn't know what caused tooth decay, but they could tell when a tooth started to wiggle. And no one wanted to lose teeth when winter was still 3 months long, and bread could chip a molar. Ancient medical texts suggested rinsing with infusions made from oak bark, black pepper, or wild chamomile. These brews didn't just freshen your breath, they made you feel like you were drinking medicine. And if they didn't work, at least the taste distracted you from your breath for a while. In monasteries, oral care was part of spiritual discipline. Monks were issued salt for morning scrubbing. Higher-ranking clerics might own pre-mixed tooth powders stored in wooden boxes carved with the name of their patron saint. No one dared complain. Bad breath, after all, was just another trial of faith. At village markets, merchants hawked miracle powders to clean the teeth and make your breath smell like roses. The ingredients? Usually lime, resin, and well-burned ash. Shoppers often tried a pinch in front of amused onlookers. They'd buy a jar to last the month if it didn't sting immediately. Some folk remedies recorded a toothpaste from charcoal powder, salt, honey, and egg white. The mixture was dried into small bricks. To use it, you'd bite off a chunk and chew it into a paste. It didn't exactly whet your appetite, but many swore it prevented cavities and somehow made your speech clearer. Of course, not everyone brushed. Many lived their whole lives without ever tasting mint, but they weren't judged because no one else did either. Bad breath was a personal issue, only a problem during close conversations. And when that happened, the solution was simple. Turn your head and speak loudly. Yes, medieval dental care sounds unsettling, but these odd methods were the ancestors of modern products. They show how people, despite a lack of knowledge and tools, always tried to stay clean, using anything, enduring everything, and fueled by a strangely admirable determination. So next time you hold your toothbrush and wonder if skipping just one night would matter, remember your ancestors, brushing with charcoal, pulling teeth with tongs, and praying every time they smiled. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll appreciate your minty toothpaste a little more. In a world without electric razors, no shaving gel, and no sparkling white tile bathrooms, hair removal wasn't a matter of style. It was a test of courage. Medieval folks didn't have spas, but they had knives, fire, handmade tweezers, and a will tougher than the stone lining their bread ovens. Hair, everywhere it grew, was a mark of adulthood and a source of irritation. Men could wear beards as symbols of power, virtue, or religious devotion, but others shaved clean to look tidy and to avoid having soup cling to their face. Depending on region, class, and faith, a beard could be a source of pride or something to scrape off before leaving the house. The primary shaving tool was the blade. Not the sleek steel from cowboy movies or glossy ads, but crude metal sharpened on a stone, sometimes heated to sterilize. Shaving was reserved for special occasions. Festivals, weddings, visits to authorities, or simply when your wife declared your face felt like a broom. Beforehand, men might soften their skin with warm water, pig fat, or ash mixed with oil, but it still hurt. A lot. Bleeding was expected. No one blinked at seeing a man in church with a nick on his chin. If you managed a bloodless shave, you were either a monk of exceptional skill or hadn't shaved. Afterward, leaves were applied to stop the bleeding. Some splashed on strong alcohol, disinfecting the cut while testing their pain threshold. Not everyone shaved themselves. In towns, there were professionals, part barber, part dentist, part midwife if needed. You'd sit on a stool, remove your shirt, and pray that the barber had slept well. They'd give the blade a few ceremonial shakes before diving in, slow enough not to terrify you, fast enough that you wouldn't reconsider. And what about women? Hair removal wasn't as emphasized as today, but it certainly existed. Eyebrows, for example, were plucked or even shaved off if the era's beauty ideal favored a high forehead. In some periods, noblewomen shaved the front of their hairline to extend the forehead, then powdered it white with lead-based makeup. Whether it was beautiful is debatable, but it was certainly painful. The plucking was done with tweezers, or the closest approximation, crude metal pincers. These didn't have rubber grips or ergonomic design, just two stiff prongs and a steady hand. Women used them for mustaches, brows, and other visible areas. No numbing cream, just raw tolerance and the occasional sharp yelp. Body hair was more private and less judged than facial hair. Still, it wasn't ignored. In the summer, when body odor traveled faster than gossip, some chose to shave their armpits, especially among the upper classes. They used small blades or, if bold, homemade wax from honey and tree resin. The results were mixed, but at least you felt less woolly under layers of wool. The wealthier might hire someone to help. A noblewoman might have a maid assigned to tend to her neckline, forehead, and back. These sessions took place behind closed doors, with silk towels for sweat and herbal tea for composure. Some also used pumice stone to exfoliate rough areas, a method that sounds painful, but was surprisingly common. Hair removal wasn't just cosmetic, it was spiritual for some. Some saw a smooth body as a symbol of purity or resistance to temptation. Ascetics sometimes shaved their bodies to feel closer to the divine. Others believed long beards attracted demons, while some thought shaving made you vulnerable to them. Either way, you'd better shave carefully or risk a spiritual scandal. Post-shave care wasn't exactly a skincare routine, but some applied herbal powders to soothe irritation. Chamomile, willow bark, and homemade cornstarch powders were used to calm the skin and hide the red marks. If someone asked why you looked like a bee stung your jaw, you simply smiled and said it was a beauty day. Medieval beauty standards weren't universal. There were no one-size-fits-all ideals, only habits shaped by religion, weather, and local legends. A smooth face might be noble in one region and suspicious in another. A man with a wild beard might be admired as a scholar, or mistaken for a recluse who eats dried fish with stray cats. Yet no matter where hair grew or how it was dealt with, it was a natural part of the body. And somehow medieval people found ways to live with it, fight it, or accept it. Armed with the simplest tools, a few leaves, and a determined spirit honed by sweat, dirt, and the eternal quest to feel clean in an uncleanable world. In historical conversations, we often hear about kings, wars, nights, and grand feasts. But a few pauses to ask the important follow-up question. Where did everyone go to take care of business after the feast? If you've ever wondered how people went to the bathroom in medieval times, the short answer is, wherever was most convenient, and hopefully not on top of someone else. Let's start with the nobility. Castles weren't equipped with modern toilets for all their size and strength. Instead, they had a garderobe, a narrow little room often jutting precariously from the edge of the castle wall. Inside was a stone or wooden bench with a hole in the middle. You sat, did your business, and everything dropped straight down into a moat, the grass. Or, if you were especially unlucky, the head of a guard passing underneath. Toilet paper? Forget it. People used dry straw, scrap cloth, leaves, or, if you were truly fancy, soft wool, reused multiple times. Some used seashells. Others used their left hand and rinsed it in a nearby bucket of water. No one thought this was strange. No one had a better option. Garderobes were typically built to catch the wind so the smell wouldn't linger. Still, they weren't the place you'd hang out in. In winter, icy wind rushed in and encouraged you to finish quickly. In summer, flies and stench made you hold your breath. Some castles even had primitive plumbing that channeled waste into a stream or pond. Good for cleanliness, terrible for anyone living downstream. In the countryside, peasants used outhouses, holes dug behind the garden, sometimes with a wooden or straw-covered shelter. They'd cover the pit and dig a new one when it filled. No one wrote poetry about this process, but everyone agreed it was a job worth avoiding. When going outside wasn't ideal at night, people used chamber pots, called night soil pots. These were buckets, bowls, or big jars tucked under the bed. In the morning, they were dumped in designated spots, or, in many cases, flung out the window. If you lived in a medieval city, you quickly learned to dodge after hearing the warning cry, "Beware below," a polite announcement that something unpleasant was about to fall. Medieval cities were full of people, and full of their waste. Drainage ditches are often clogged, gutters overflowed with mud, dishwater, and unnamed horrors. The city stank of hearth smoke, horse dung, human smells, and stagnant wastewater. Locals got used to it. Newcomers did not. City officials tried to impose order. Some towns banned dumping waste in the streets during the day. It was only allowed after sundown, and you had to shout a warning even then. Violators faced fines or public service. Enforcing this wasn't easy. Many dumped in secret or simply didn't care. Some places built public latrines, wooden buildings over water channels with rows of holes. In theory, running water carried everything away. In practice, if the water flow was weak, it all became a disgusting swamp. And when it rained, the water flowed back in, turning the latrine into a battlefield. There were also real jobs dedicated to this mess, cesspit cleaners. They were hired to clear out waste pits that hadn't been touched in years. Their uniform included rubber-like boots, face rags, and nerves of steel. They worked at night when the smell was less potent, and everyone else was asleep. Using buckets, ropes, and sheer willpower, they hauled out waste layer by layer. Those who could do this job weren't just strong, but battle-hardened philosophers in disguise. Waste was also recycled. Yes, really. Urine was collected to clean the linen due to its ammonia content. Human feces was mixed with straw and refused to make fertilizer. In rural areas, even night soil collectors bought your waste, carting it away in lidded barrels in exchange for firewood, vegetables, or a few coins. Still, no one wanted to live next to the waste yard. The smell of flies and disease made it a cursed address. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid often started in these poorly maintained areas. People didn't know about bacteria, but they knew what happened when too much waste met too many humans in one place. Religion occasionally stepped in. Monasteries tended to have better sanitation. They built rows of latrines along flowing water, each stall with a wall and a vent. Monks had a schedule for using the toilet and weren't allowed to talk during their meditative moments. Cleanliness was considered a spiritual discipline. Keeping the body clean was a way of guarding the soul. Ultimately, Medieval waste management was a daily balance between biology and ingenuity. It's not the glamorous side of history, but it was a part of life no one escaped. In a world without plumbing, no flush handles, and no air freshening sprays, people did what had to be done the simplest way they could. Turn away, close your eyes, and dump it quickly. If you think the Middle Ages were all about swords, dragons, and love poems carved in wood, you're right. But tucked between the ballads and knights in armor was a reality that never made it onto castle murals or into epic tales. Medieval women had periods, and no one, not even the monkish chroniclers, wanted to discuss it. No pads, no tampons, and no menstrual cups. There are no private bathrooms, sealed-off toilets, or soft music playing in the changing room. And yet, millions of women managed every month, with cloth, straw, herbs, resilience, and a bit of good old-fashioned denial. The most common method was reusable cloth. These were old linen scraps folded into multiple layers, placed in underwear, or held in place with fabric belts around the hips. After use, they were washed in stream water, lye soap, or, if available, fermented urine. Once clean, they were hung out to dry, with a silent prayer that it wouldn't rain, and stored for the next round. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. Without waterproof layers, leaks were frequent. Rainy days, muddy roads, or fieldwork could undo all efforts. So many women played it safe, stayed home if possible, wore dark skirts, or sat on a straw pile and waited it out. In some regions, women were banned from church during their periods. They were considered unclean, in a religious sense, more than a hygienic one. This created a rift between gender and spirituality, but it also gave women a legitimate excuse to rest for a few days. After all, not sitting through a 2-hour sermon was its kind of divine mercy. Some believed menstrual blood was toxic. Folktales claimed if a man touched it, his beard would fall out, milk would sour, and bread wouldn't rise. With no scientific proof but plenty of superstition, men kept a respectful distance during a woman's monthly visit. For women, it was perhaps the only time they were left alone, not asked what's for dinner, or told to help cut hay. Old medical texts mention that some women stuffed their clothes with dried herbs to mask odor, sage, mugwort, or dried orange peel. They didn't stop leaks, but they gave a sense of control. In colder regions, wool was rolled and tucked into cloth layers. Crude, yes, but surprisingly warm and reasonably effective. The challenge wasn't just managing it, but hiding it. No one taught girls what to expect. Knowledge was passed down quietly from mother to daughter, with cryptic advice like, if your skirt's wet and it's not raining, don't panic. They had to figure out the rest through trial and error and many unwanted surprises. Menstrual cramps were rarely acknowledged. Women pushed through, worked as usual, and if it hurt too much, they sipped herbal tea or lay still. Some wore charms, others burned incense and prayed. Some applied warm stones to their abdomen. Most just endured it. That pain never made it into the history books, but it was real, monthly, and generational. Nunneries sometimes had rules. Some allowed rest during the first days of the cycle, letting women swap heavy chores for lighter ones. Others demanded total silence. No complaints allowed. Humility was expected, even if you were scrubbing floors while your insides felt like an angry blacksmith was twisting them. But it wasn't all bleak. Some communities had more positive views. Menstrual blood was seen as a fertility symbol, a Mother Nature gift. Women with regular cycles were considered lucky. They were blessed to bear healthy children and were sometimes invited to planting festivals as emblems of fertile earth. In art and literature, menstruation was almost invisible. No paintings, poetry, or lute songs for the red days. But somewhere, buried in forgotten manuscripts, a line or two might mention the quiet days of women, when they withdrew to a corner, breathed through it, and waited for the red tide to pass as silently as it came. Modern life gives us much to be thankful for, and menstrual products are near the top. No worrying about leaks, odor, or hand-washing clothes by candlelight. No need to explain to others why you're quiet at dinner. There is no need to sit on a straw to avoid leaving marks. Medieval women didn't have choices, but they had endurance. They didn't ask for praise. They just wanted a quiet space, a dry scrap of cloth, and to get through the day without someone asking, "Why do you look tired?" And the next month, they did it all over again. If you've ever struggled to get your kid into the bath, try doing it in the Middle Ages, when bath water had to be boiled bucket by bucket. Clean towels were a luxury, and your child had just wrestled a dog, fallen in straw, and eaten a meat pie with hands that had never met soap. And that's when you realize that keeping a medieval child from smelling like a barn was an epic-level mission. Children weren't bathed daily. No one was, not even adults. But kids had a special talent for accumulating grime faster than anyone else, rolling in the dirt, climbing trees, poking animal dung with sticks, drawing on their faces with charcoal, eating food off the floor, and occasionally brawling with chickens. Each day added a new layer of aroma. Bathing a child usually happened only when it had to, like after a bout of diarrhea, when their hair stood up from too much straw, or when grandma came to visit and fainted after stroking her grandchild's cheek. On such occasions, mothers or grandmothers would boil water in a huge iron pot, pour it into a wooden tub, throw in some herbs, and lower the child like they were making peasant soup. If the water was warm, it was a lucky day. If there wasn't enough firewood, the water got a splash of ash and was poured over the child with a ladle. No gentle goat milk baby soap, just rough cloth dipped in cold water, scrubbing essential areas, face, hands, neck, and bottom. The child would often scream like they were being sacrificed, but in reality, it was just the cold and aggressive scrubbing. Some families had a routine of daily wiping instead of full baths. They used cloth soaked in boiled water with herbs like mugwort or rosemary to wipe the child down after waking up. It didn't make them smell nice, but it helped mask the scent of old chicken poop and crusty noses. Some fancier mothers even tied little scented sachets around their children's necks, filled with dried flowers or citrus peels to distract the nose. Keeping a child from stinking wasn't just hygiene, it was social strategy. A mildly fragrant child boosted the family's reputation at feasts, market days, or church. Especially if said child didn't cry or shriek. A passable smell could elevate a family's social standing by at least 2 nosy anti-points. Hair was rarely washed unless disaster struck. A chicken pecked their head, a fire singed their bangs, or lice built a palace. Then, hair was washed with lye water, or, if you were lucky, boiled soap nut or acacia leaves. Afterward, it was dried with linen and tied back with hemp string, not for style, but to keep it out of their eyes while chasing pigs. As for teeth, if they still had them, they were scrubbed with salt or ash. No one made kids brush daily. Eating plenty of greens was believed to prevent tooth rot, and chewing clove buds would naturally clean the teeth. Some kids got their teeth brushed by their mothers, meaning mom would stick her finger in ash and rub it inside their mouths. No child remembers that fondly. Their clothes were simple cloth wraps, easy to tie, wash, and lose. Running around, they'd tear or ditch their clothes in the fields. Some toddlers went completely naked during summer, which made it easier to clean up after. Adults didn't bat an eye. They'd all done the same at that age and figured the kids would eventually learn to wear pants. Some families had their own freshening tricks, sprinkling a mix of ash and crushed herbs onto necks and armpits, or rubbing a bit of herb-infused sheep fat on dry skin to mask odors. Go overboard, though, and your kid ends up smelling like a meatball in a stew, mildly fragrant but unpleasant to hug. As children grew and became more mobile, cleanliness became harder. Mothers tied scarves around their heads, tucked their tunics into belts, and chased their little mud missiles. Once caught, the child got their limbs scrubbed down while being threatened with being locked in the chicken coop. They'd scream, then giggle, then run again. It was the medieval version of a domestic waltz. In noble households and monasteries, kids had it slightly better. Some had attendants who wiped them down, changed their clothes, and washed their hands after meals. Some noblewomen used diluted wine to wipe their children's hands, believing it cleaned and brought good fortune. The kids didn't care about fortune. They just wanted to return to the mud puddle and find out what earthworms smelled like. Even without conveniences, medieval parents tried. They had no wet wipes, baby shampoo, or soothing lotion, but they had love, a few herbs, and patience stacked as high as their firewood pile. They didn't expect their child always to be clean enough that nobody left the dinner table when the kids sat down. Giving birth in the Middle Ages didn't happen in a brightly lit hospital, with ultrasounds, epidurals, or a team of doctors in white coats walking into the sound of soothing music. It happened at home, surrounded by the smell of wood smoke, the crowing of roosters, and the sweat of women holding down the mother's legs so she wouldn't kick the wooden table across the room. There were no gloves, no antibacterial soap. But there was the midwife, a seasoned, sharp-tongued woman who feared neither blood nor yelling. Push unless you're waiting for the harvest. The medieval midwife was both respected and a little feared. She may not have known how to read, but she knew how to deliver babies, brew herbs, read a mother's face, and most importantly, know when to worry and say, "You've got a while, take a nap." She was a doctor, a nurse, a therapist, and sometimes a part-time sorceress. When a woman was about to give birth, no one called an ambulance. They called the neighbors. Women from the village rushed over, cleared space, boiled water, lit fires, and hung herbs to ward off evil. The birthing room was usually the bedroom, temporarily turned into a delivery suite with a clean cloth over the bed, chairs set up nearby, and men banned, except for the trembling husband who was usually told to wait outside. The mother would lie on a bed or sit on a birthing chair, a wooden seat with a hole in the center, placed near the fire to keep warm. The midwife sat below, watching, encouraging, and keeping an eye on everything. One woman held the mother's head, another braced her legs, another offered herbal tea, and someone always whispered, "Almost there," even when nothing was remotely close to there. Pain relief? Not really. Anesthesia? No chance. There might be wine, mugwort, or, if lucky, an opium and spice brew. But mostly it was boiling water and whispered prayers. Some labors lasted dozens of hours. The screams filled the house. Children were sent to hide in the barn. And finally, the baby arrived, caught with bare hands, wiped with old cloth, and wrapped in boiled wool blankets. The umbilical cord was cut with a heated iron knife. No sterile clamps, no antiseptic gauze. But the midwife had done it hundreds of times, relying on hands, experience, and a muttered prayer to Saint Apollonia, or whichever saint was listening that night. There was blood, of course. Sometimes families tiled the birthing room floor so much to make post-labor cleanup easier. After birth, the mother rested. Herbal tea was brewed with chamomile, rosemary, or raspberry leaves. In some places, she drank weak beer to regain strength. Warm herbs were placed on her belly to expel bad blood. The mother-in-law often oversaw the recovery and was usually the first to ask, "Who does the baby look like?" with suspicious curiosity. The baby was inspected. Did it cry loud enough? Were all fingers and toes present? Did it bear the mark of the devil? A strange birthmark could spark rumors for years. If the baby was healthy, there was a collective sigh of relief. If not, the priest was called, holy ash was applied, and in urgent cases, the baby was baptized immediately, just in case its soul needed safe passage. Childbirth didn't always end well. Mortality rates for mothers and infants were high. No matter how skilled, the midwife couldn't change fate if the baby were breech, the mother exhausted, the cord tangled, or the stars simply misaligned. But she stayed anyway, held the mother's hand and said, "You're strong," because sometimes that's all anyone needed to hear. If everything went well, by the third day, the mother was bathed, dressed in clean clothes, and could hold her baby without fainting. Her first post-birth meal might be thick porridge, bread soaked in milk, or a long-simmered meat broth if the family was wealthy. The household celebrated with a song or a bottle of wine, and then everyone returned to their chores, leaving the mother with her newborn and a long, sleepless night. The midwife cleaned up, washed cloths, emptied basins, wiped the knife, and silently added one more birth to her memory. No medals, no pension, just a thank you hug, a basket of eggs, or a sack of fresh beans. Medieval childbirth wasn't glamorous, peaceful, or safe by modern standards, but it was raw, real, and tethered to life in its most primal form. It was where first cries rang out among straw and firewood. Worn hands stayed steady even when blood flowed too fast, and each new life was a small triumph against the harshness of the age. In a world without deodorant, body sprays, or even the concept of 48-hour freshness, keeping your armpits from knocking people unconscious was a heroic feat. If you've ever broken a sweat waiting for a bus and worried the person next to you might notice, imagine living through a medieval summer, in thick wool, without fans, without soap, and with a cat sleeping soundly inside your only pair of shoes. Body odor in the Middle Ages wasn't a personal issue, but a communal feature. Everyone had a scent. Everyone sweat. Everyone wore multiple layers, and everyone had, at some point, gone 2 weeks without washing their clothes because it wouldn't stop raining. In that reality, human smell wasn't something to avoid. It was something to endure and occasionally gently disguise with herbs. People didn't use roll-on deodorant. They used fireplace ash. The ash, taken from clean burned wood, was mixed with vinegar or mugwort infusion. It absorbed moisture, mildly disinfected, and stung like a betrayal if you'd shaved your armpits the day before. The more refined folks might sprinkle dried flower powder or crushed tree bark in the area, hoping the person next to them would mistake it for something botanical. Vinegar was a go-to lifesaver. Some soaked a cloth in diluted vinegar and wiped their underarms each morning, or if pressed for time, just splashed it directly on and fanned themselves dry. It masked sweat smell effectively, though it created confusion if you walked into someone's home smelling suspiciously like a pickled cabbage. Those with more resources used scented sachets, small cloth pouches filled with mint leaves, lavender, or fennel seeds, tucked under layers of clothing or stitched into collars. The herbal aroma would slowly release as you sweat, creating a pleasant freshness for the first half hour. After that, it became a gentle fusion of body odor and backyard shrubbery. The armpits weren't the only area under scrutiny. The whole body could become a scent emitter if left unaddressed. So people wore linen undergarments, a base layer that soaked up sweat and kept odors somewhat contained instead of broadcasting them to the entire room. These linen shifts were washed weekly, weather permitting. If it rained, well, they waited. Some folks steeped cloths in herbal infusions, rosemary, chamomile, ginger root. Once cooled, these were used to wipe the body, both for fragrance and a bit of relaxation. But drying the clothes thoroughly was crucial. Otherwise, they'd swap sweat smell for mildew. Then there were the pets. Not your clean, brushed, pampered poodles of today, but half-feral dogs, chicken-chasing cats, backyard rabbits, and even piglets, living right inside the house. These animals weren't just companions or heating systems. They were odor camouflage. A dog sleeping in the corner might help distract you from your funk. If the dog decided to relocate, it was probably time for a vinegar rinse. And pets had their scent, often overpowering. A cat that spent its days rolling in the chicken coop and its nights curled up in your straw bed wasn't exactly lavender-scented. But medieval folks weren't picky. They loved animals with a fragrant tolerance, sharing their blankets and sometimes choosing not to sniff too hard. Odor control could also mean manipulating the air. Open windows, burning herbs, hanging dried orange peels, or leaving a bowl of vinegar out in the room were ways to dilute the stink without offending anyone. Some burned incense sticks made from rosemary, sawdust, and tree resin. The smoke lifted the scent and replaced it with a gentle, charred aroma. People also embraced body odor as part of their identity. A man who smelled like firewood was seen as hardworking. A grandmother with a blend of herbs and butter was probably a skilled cook. A boy who reeked of wet dog was admired for his bravery. He'd probably napped in the pigsty. In this world, no one demanded floral-scented perfection. You just had to avoid making people cry. Of course, some overdid it. A few gentlemen drenched themselves in homemade perfume, alcohol mixed with herbs, triggering rumors of a moonshine leak. Some noblewomen stuffed so much mint into their dresses that they attracted butterflies while walking past vegetable gardens. These were more amusing than offensive. Fireplace ash remained the silent, reliable champion in all the aromatic chaos. It absorbed odor, disinfected, was cheap, and always available. If you felt things were getting out of hand, you grabbed a handful, rubbed it under your arms, and let it work. No one would compliment your fragrance, but at least they wouldn't flee the room when you walked in. Some garments weren't unwashed because the wearer forgot, but because they weren't dirty enough to justify the effort. In medieval times, doing laundry was a monumental task that demanded time, strength, clean water, and a spirit as unshakable as a whetstone. So people didn't change clothes daily. Some garments were worn straight through harvest, winter, spring, and back to harvest again, clinging proudly to their owners like a shield against the world and judgment alike. Linen was the most common fabric, lightweight, sweat-absorbent, and easier to wash than wool. Most people wore a layer of linen closest to the skin called a chemise, designed to absorb sweat and body oils. This was the true sacrificial layer in the war on odor. The outer layers, wool tunics, cloaks, were kept as clean as possible by simply not washing them. Washing wool was an ordeal. Wet wool became as heavy as a sack of soaked potatoes, easily lost shape, rotted if not dried properly, and rarely dried quickly. Without washing machines, dryers, or reliable sunshine, a poorly washed wool tunic could transform into a tablecloth for the cat. So unless it had bloodstains, fell into pig manure, or got vomited on, it was considered still good. When laundry day came, a rare event worthy of marking on the lunar calendar, the entire village might gather near a stream or well. Women brought wooden buckets, fireplace ash, homemade soap from lard and lye, and clothing that had seen too much of life. They beat the clothes against rocks, scrubbed them with wooden brushes, and rinsed them in cold water. Scrubbing echoed like a symphony of determined hands and stubborn stains. There was no hot water unless boiled, no scented detergents or floral fabric softener. The only scent left after laundry was river water, ash, sunshine, and fatigue. Clothes were dried by stringing lines between trees, pinning them with twigs, and guarding them from chickens. Children were usually tasked with chasing cats away from the drying laundry, though many were lured away early by roasted sweet potatoes. Some families tried to wash regularly, meaning once a month. Others reserved a church shirt, a special garment only worn on Sundays, washed twice a year, before Easter and before Christmas. Daily wear shirts aged nobly, absorbing their owner's scent like a medieval form of biometric ID. And don't think nobles dressed cleaner. They just had more clothes, not cleaner ones. Noblewomen owned silk, lace, and velvet, which would dissolve like rice paper if washed carelessly. Instead of cleaning, they aired garments out in the breeze, dusted them with scented powders, hung them over rosemary branches, or had servants freshen them up using one scent to mask another. Cleanliness in this case was a flexible concept. Servants responsible for their master's laundry had their tricks. They smoked garments with herb smoke, beat out dust with feather dusters, wiped collars with vinegar, and lined hems with scented cloth. It was an art of looking clean rather than being clean. Some servants were held in higher esteem than tailors simply because they could make a 3-month-old dress look worn for the first time. And what about the children? They wore whatever their mothers handed them. Their clothes were often patchwork hand-me-downs, replaced only when so shredded they no longer qualified as clothing. Fabric scraps from parents or older siblings were resized, retied, or hastily stitched together. No one bothered to wash the children's clothes weekly. The goal was just to keep them clothed when guests came over. Washcloths were precious and used to wipe faces, hands, or anything remotely wipeable. Each household had only a few rotated and carefully washed. Tear or lose one, and your mother might scold you till spring. They were carefully washed, dried separately, and sometimes hand-pressed to retain their shape. A clean, soft linen cloth might even be used in baptism or as part of a bridal dowry. Some families maintained the tradition of the wedding cloth. a finely sewn towel used for the first time on a wedding day, then stored carefully and washed once a year, hung in a window as a symbol of luck. In a world without sewing machines, a clean, well-made cloth represented diligence, pride, and, if embroidered with initials, the height of personal flair. And then, there were the garments that were never washed, not because they were sacred, but because people forgot they existed. Left hanging in old chests, buried under drawers, or half-eaten by mice. They remained, silently absorbing time and odor, patiently awaiting the day someone would decide, might as well wear this, no sense letting it go to waste. It's strange to think that in a world full of springs, rivers, and ponds, people were terrified of water, not drowning, but of drinking it. To medieval folks, water wasn't a symbol of purity, but a dangerous gift, clear one day and deadly for no reason. Clean water was a vague concept. In towns, water came from communal wells or ditches channeling nearby streams. The problem? Streams were also where people did laundry, washed pots, let livestock drink, and dumped chamber pots during heavy rains. Wells might be deep, but if built near pigsties, magical things could still happen. Suddenly, the water smelled like compost marinated for 3 days. So, people avoided cold water. It was believed to cause illness, especially if you'd just finished working or eaten a heavy meal. There were tales of an uncle who drank cold water after herding cattle and coughed through 3 seasons straight. Since then, the whole village has drank anything but water. Instead, they drank small beer, lightly fermented, low-alcohol beer, often used as a water substitute. Even children drank it, as it was safer than river water. It was homebrewed from barley, baking yeast, and boiled water. At least the boiling killed germs. It didn't taste good, but didn't trap you in the outhouse for 3 days. In rural areas, water was boiled and then cooled, often with apple slices or mint leaves added to cover the taste of mud. Some people had clever tricks, dropping a silver coin into a water bowl, believing silver would absorb toxins. Science hasn't confirmed it, but the sparkle of that coin gave folks enough peace of mind to drink. In summer, water spoils easily. Rain barrels attracted flies, wells ran low, and streams filled with silt. Elders advised, if the water's clear, wash your face. If it's cloudy, water the plants. If dead fish float on top, move away. Shepherds had their own rule. If the sheep won't drink it, neither should you. Indoors, water was stored in wooden buckets or ceramic jars. There were no faucets, filters, or Japanese water purifiers. Fetching water was a daily task, often handled by women and children. They carried it from wells, streams, ponds, or ditches. Each bucket as heavy as a baby boar, and one wrong step could land you and your pail in the ditch. Water was used sparingly. One bucket might serve for cooking porridge, washing faces, and watering the garden. Bathing? Only if there was leftover water and warm weather. Laundry? Saved for the great wash day you read about earlier. No one wasted water on trivial things. Some even reused face washing water for their feet. Zero waste. Medieval edition. Still, water was indispensable. People rinsed their hands before meals, or at least wiped them on cloth, and rinsed their mouths afterward unless it was a dry bread kind of day. Children were taught that water could heal or harm. So when someone recovered after just drinking herbal water, the village gathered like they'd witnessed a miracle. For monks and clergy, water had a sacred meaning. Holy water was used for baptisms, altar cleaning, and blessings. In monasteries, water came from private springs, ran through wooden channels, and was lightly filtered with pebbles and pine needles. Not tasty, but clean enough not to risk divine wrath through unholy hygiene. In coastal areas, seawater wasn't for drinking, but had other uses. Some villages boil vegetables in salt water before rinsing them with fresh water, saving salt. But it isn't very clear if you mix up the steps. Others believed seawater cleansed the skin, then wondered why their noses peeled off every winter. Elders often carried small water skins made of animal hide. Inside was boiled water. sometimes infused with herbs or a splash of alcohol to cover the leather bottle smell. On long journeys, whoever had the best water bottle became instantly popular. People would ask for sips and news from places with better hydration options. Water also played a central role in medicine. Herbal water, plant decoctions, tree sap infusions, all were used to reduce fever, detox, ease pain, or simply serve as something to drink when the healer ran out of remedies. Ginger water was a cure-all. Black bean water cooled the body. Rice water cleaned wounds, or watered the vegetables, depending on their color. In short, water in medieval times was both essential and suspicious. You couldn't live without it, but couldn't trust it. You had to boil it, strain it, pray it wouldn't betray you, and always keep a bucket of small beer on standby, just in case. Medieval people lived in a sea of smells without deodorant sprays, French perfumes, or vanilla-scented candles. The scent of people, animals, food, sewage, shoes, ash, herbs, and sometimes something entirely unidentifiable, but best avoided. And in this ocean of odors, survival wasn't just a physical feat. It was an art form, the art of surviving through smell. You had to know when to breathe, when to hold your breath, and when to pretend you were sniffing daisies. Medieval people didn't just endure smells, they learned to live with them. They didn't expect to be odorless. They hoped to smell better than the next person in the same room. Thus, the age of scent strategies was born. First came the herbs. Rosemary, mint, mugwort, marjoram, and lavender were dried and stuffed into small fabric pouches, then hung around the neck, tucked into clothing, or hidden inside hats. These little sachets, called pomanders, or herb sachets, didn't just fight body odor. They kept you from passing out next to someone else. Ladies used homemade perfumes. Recipes often included strong alcohol infused with rose petals, licorice root, or lemon peel. Some added ambergris or musk, if they could afford it and weren't bothered by the fact it came from animal scent glands. The perfume wasn't sprayed but dabbed onto handkerchiefs, collars, or behind the ears, hoping it would distract others from the fact they hadn't bathed in 3 weeks. Gentlemen had their signature scents. They soaked handkerchiefs or belts in aromatic oils. Some stuffed coarse tobacco into their shoes, claiming it smelled bold and manly, or at least hid the socks. A few wore pendants containing dried herbs, hanging over their chests like a primitive gas mask. Inside homes, people burned dried herbs to mask odors. Bay leaves, pine resin, and cinnamon bark were tossed into fires or ember pots, creating thick smoke. The smoke repelled mosquitoes and sometimes overpowered the bad smells. When guests arrived, the host would burn rosemary and casually say, "Oh, what a coincidence. I just happened to be scenting the room today." In churches, fragrance became sacred. Frankincense, myrrh, and precious resins were burned in censers, filling the air with mystic clouds. The scent made the place feel holy, and conveniently distracted from the fact the man beside you had walked 5 miles without changing socks. At market fairs, smell survival reached new heights. You'd pass the fish stall, the cheese stall, the tobacco booth, and the live poultry section. Each vendor had their unique stink, and savvy sellers scattered herbs around their stalls, not necessarily to attract customers, but to stop them from fleeing. Some families hung bundles of rosemary above their doors to ward off evil spirits and make a good first impression. You could be poor and live in a tiny home, but you scored points if your doorway smelled like dried flowers instead of recycled foot wash. People even recognized each other by scent. A blacksmith smelled of smoke and iron sweat. A baker carried the scent of yeast and flour. A shepherd was an aromatic mix of wool, sheep, and open fields. No one was surprised. Some children even slept better when their pillow carried the scent of their father's shirt. A comforting blend of sweat, soil, and fireplace ash. But not everyone embraced the funk. Some were obsessed with cleanliness. They bathed in herbal water weekly, changed clothes every 3 days, and hung scented sachets in every corner. These people were sometimes viewed as suspiciously fancy, or just suspicious. After all, if you smelled too nice, maybe you were hiding something. Normal folks, they'd say, smell like life. And then came the smells no perfume could mask. Foot odor from leather boots worn all winter. Hair has been unwashed since last Christmas. A coat soaked in goose fat, smoke, and swampy creek water. These smells were part of life. They were the scent of labor, harvests, and time passing without anyone remembering to air out their tunic. So, in the medieval world, you didn't aim to be scentless. You just hoped your smell didn't trigger a public emergency. If you managed that, you weren't just surviving. You might even be complimented as the fragrant one. It is a rare honor in a world of grime, straw, and the delicate art of olfactory endurance. If you think public bathhouses were just places to scrub and wash your feet, then you've underestimated the imagination of medieval people. In an age where owning a private bathtub was like having a car today, the public bathhouse wasn't just about getting clean. It was a cinema, a tea room, a gossip hub, and occasionally a proposal venue. It was a cinema, a tea room, a gossip hub, and occasionally a proposal venue. Public bathhouses were an essential part of urban life in major cities, especially across continental Europe, France, Germany, Italy, where traces of Roman tradition still lingered. These places offered hot baths, cold pools, steam rooms, relaxation beds, and sometimes even light meals. People came not only to clean their bodies but to connect. It was where old folks discussed the weather. Young men flexed their muscles, women exchanged herbal bath recipes, and a fabric merchant might whisper about a noble woman caught hiding love letters in her stocking. Bathing was just the excuse. The real goal was to stay updated and check who was courting whom in the village. Unlike modern expectations, medieval public baths weren't shy about exposure. Men and women often bathed together, unless a church decree or monastic management said otherwise. Some places assigned gender-specific hours, but in most cases, everyone soaked together under dim candlelight and rising steam with a surprisingly casual attitude. There were no swimsuits, no curtains. People entered with loosely wrapped towels and let themselves sink into warm water like lazy fish. Sometimes, someone played the lute in the corner. A meat pie vendor called out from the window, and a few couples whispered and giggled in the far end where the steam was thick enough to blur identities. Some romances began in those murky waters. And if you think bathhouses were only for the wealthy or middle class, think again. Laborers came too. Not often, but often enough to boast, "I've bathed this season." Some bathhouses offered evening discounts or free entry for low-income people on saints' feast days. You could find yourself soaking next to a battle-worn knight and a baker still dusted with flour behind his ears. Running a bathhouse required finesse. Water was heated with firewood and poured into wooden or stone tubs. Herbs like mugwort, rosemary, and mint were tossed in to mask body odors and the lingering presence of previous bathers. Some added salt or diluted wine. There was no chlorine, no filtration system. Just faith that hot water could cleanse everything, including sin if you soaked long enough. Bath attendants had jobs: stirring the water, switching out towels, maintaining order, and ensuring things didn't escalate. Some bathhouses gained such reputations for accidental intimacy that city authorities issued strict guidelines. Certain doors bore signs reading, "Bathing only, no flirting," though these signs were mostly symbolic. Still, the bathhouse made an ideal proposal site in a world starved for privacy. Once both parties were clean, wrapped in thin linen, sipping herbal water, and feeling more relaxed than ever, saying, "Will you marry me?" suddenly felt oddly reasonable. Many marriages began with a shared bath, and sometimes a conveniently dropped towel. Beyond socializing, bathhouses were also viewed as healing spaces. Soaking in hot water was thought to drive away evil spirits, soothe fatigue, and wash away sins. Healers prescribed foot soaks thrice a week for joint pain, or herb steam baths for women recovering from childbirth. Bathing wasn't just hygiene. It was spiritual therapy in a world saturated with smell and stress. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Some strict religious followers saw co-ed bathing as indecent and built private tubs, or avoided bathing altogether. Others feared cold water or believed excessive washing allowed the body to absorb bad air. And quite a few insisted that bathing strips away your natural defense, i.e., dust and sweat. But overall, the public bathhouse was a rare oasis in medieval folks' straw-strewn, sweat-soaked lives. It was where bodies could feel light, minds could unwind, and, if you were lucky, you'd leave not just clean, but with a new friend, lover, or a juicy new rumor. It would be very useful to sell vegetables at the town market. Winter in the Middle Ages was not a sparkling, snow-dusted postcard like in Christmas movies. It was cold, relentless, and harsh enough to make personal hygiene a luxury that sat firmly at the bottom of the priority list. Right after survival, not freezing, and keeping all your toes. When the wind started to pick up, no one thought about changing face-washing water. They considered preserving the greasy layer clinging to their skin like a natural winter coat. Yes, a bit of dirt wasn't something to be ashamed of in winter. It was a traditional insulation strategy. You didn't bathe in winter unless there was a major event, like a wedding, a funeral, or a once-a-month craving for the sensation of water. Otherwise, you gave yourself a cursory wipe, changed your underlayer, if you had a spare, and prayed your scent wouldn't knock out the neighbors every time you sneezed. The first issue was water. There was no hot tap. You had to chop wood, stoke a fire, and boil an enormous pot to get enough lukewarm water to soak your feet. And if you weren't quick, the water would cool before you peeled off 5 layers of clothes. So you sat staring at the steaming tub while your feet clung to the frozen earth. Bathing the entire body was not for the faint of heart. Drafts blew through homes with no glass windows, and every time you undressed, it felt like your soul was being sucked out through your skin. People had to sit near the hearth, straw beneath their feet, with someone standing by in case the cold made them faint and smash their heads on the wash basin. Instead, most adopted a spot cleaning strategy. Wipe your face in the morning with a cloth dipped in herbal water. Wash your hands before eating. Clean your feet at night. The rest could wait. This might result in you smelling like lavender up front and something more medieval in the back. But everyone was in the same boat, so no one judged. In monasteries, monks had a specific winter bathing schedule, once a month or twice if a mysterious fever broke out. Water was boiled in the morning, and bathing took place during shifts, 10 minutes each. No talking, no complaining. Complaints waste precious heat from your lungs. Clothes weren't washed often either. Laundry water froze solid outdoors. Hanging garments on the line was an open invitation for frost to turn them into wearable ice sculptures. So people wore their clothes until they felt they were starting to glow on their own, then washed them in boiled water with ash and dried them by the hearth for 3 straight days. Hair? Washing it in winter was a survival challenge. No hair dryers. After cleaning, you sat near the fire, wrapped your head in cloth, and hoped you wouldn't get sick. Many people simply dusted the dry herbal powder into their hair, brushed vigorously to absorb the oil, and called it relatively clean. Some used ash powder, considered a primitive form of dry shampoo, sprinkled it in, and hoped for the best. To mask smells, people got creative. Dried orange peels in pockets, scarves soaked in vinegar mixed with rosemary, powdered mugwort on the collar. Some wore necklaces made of peppercorns and dried flowers for spiritual protection and odor camouflage. The philosophy was, if you can't be clean, at least smell intentionally weird. Pets played an important role. A cat on your lap made a great heat source. But if it had just crawled out of the chicken coop and jumped onto your bed, that added a new scent layer to your existence. Still, winter wasn't the time for fussiness. If the cat's back was warm, you tolerated whatever barnyard perfume it brought. Children were the hardest to keep clean. They'd run indoors, roll in straw, crawl under tables, and then sneak out to stomp in frozen mud with the geese. Wiping them down required strength, patience, and a cloth the cat hadn't claimed. Many mothers used warm, damp cloths for a quick wipe down before bundling the kids in double layers, hoping the cold would freeze the germs solid. And despite all this, medieval folks found a strange beauty in simply existing. After dinner, sitting by the fire, clutching a mug of weak ale, unwashed hair warm under a linen cap, the scent of humanity blending with burning wood. They felt alive. Not pristine, but alive. Warm enough to laugh, patient enough to wait for spring, and creative enough to turn a bathless winter into something nobody complained about. Winter in the Middle Ages was not a sparkling snow-dusted postcard like in Christmas movies. It was cold, relentless, and harsh enough to make personal hygiene a luxury that sat firmly at the bottom of the priority list, right after survival, not freezing, and keeping all your toes. When the wind started to pick up, no one thought about changing face-washing water. They considered preserving the greasy layer clinging to their skin like a natural winter coat. Yes, a bit of dirt wasn't something to be ashamed of in winter. It was a traditional insulation strategy. You didn't bathe in winter unless there was a major event, like a wedding, a funeral, or a once-a-month craving for the sensation of water. Otherwise, you gave yourself a cursory wipe, changed your underlayer, if you had a spare, and prayed your scent wouldn't knock out the neighbors every time you sneezed. The first issue was water. There was no hot tap. You had to chop wood, stoke a fire, and boil an enormous pot to get enough lukewarm water to soak your feet. And if you weren't quick, the water would cool before you peeled off 5 layers of clothes. So you sat staring at the steaming tub while your feet clung to the frozen earth. Bathing the entire body was not for the faint of heart. Drafts blew through homes with no glass windows, and every time you undressed, it felt like your soul was being sucked out through your skin. People had to sit near the hearth, straw beneath their feet, with someone standing by in case the cold made them faint and smash their heads on the wash basin. Instead, most adopted a spot cleaning strategy. Wipe your face in the morning with a cloth dipped in herbal water. Wash your hands before eating. Clean your feet at night. The rest could wait. This might result in you smelling like lavender up front and something more medieval in the back. But everyone was in the same boat, so no one judged. In monasteries, monks had a specific winter bathing schedule, once a month or twice if a mysterious fever broke out. Water was boiled in the morning, and bathing took place during shifts, 10 minutes each. No talking, no complaining. Complaints waste precious heat from your lungs. Clothes weren't washed often either. Laundry water froze solid outdoors. Hanging garments on the line was an open invitation for frost to turn them into wearable ice sculptures. So people wore their clothes until they felt they were starting to glow on their own. Then washed them in boiled water with ash and dried them by the hearth for 3 straight days. Hair? Washing it in winter was a survival challenge. No hair dryers. After cleaning, you sat near the fire, wrapped your head in cloth, and hoped you wouldn't get sick. Many people simply dusted the dry herbal powder into their hair, brushed vigorously to absorb the oil, and called it relatively clean. Some used ash powder, considered a primitive form of dry shampoo, sprinkled it in, and hoped for the best. To mask smells, people got creative. Dried orange peels in pockets, scarves soaked in vinegar mixed with rosemary, powdered mugwort on the collar. Some wore necklaces made of peppercorns and dried flowers for spiritual protection and odor camouflage. The philosophy was, if you can't be clean, at least smell intentionally weird. Pets played an important role. A cat on your lap made a great heat source, but if it had just crawled out of the chicken coop and jumped onto your bed, that added a new scent layer to your existence. Still, winter wasn't the time for fussiness. If the cat's back was warm, you tolerated whatever barnyard perfume it brought. Children were the hardest to keep clean. They'd run indoors, roll in straw, crawl under tables, and then sneak out to stomp in frozen mud with the geese. Wiping them down required strength, patience, and a cloth the cat hadn't claimed. Many mothers used warm, damp cloths for a quick wipe down before bundling the kids in double layers, hoping the cold would freeze the germs solid. And despite all this, medieval folks found a strange beauty in simply existing. After dinner, sitting by the fire, clutching a mug of weak ale, unwashed hair warm under a linen cap, the scent of humanity blending with burning wood, they felt alive. Not pristine, but alive. Warm enough to laugh, patient enough to wait for spring, and creative enough to turn a bathless winter into something nobody complained about. These days, if you have a headache, you see a doctor. If you have a toothache, you go to the dentist. If something feels seriously wrong, you call an ambulance. But in the Middle Ages, if anything hurt, from your head to your heel, there was a good chance you'd be taken to someone with a razor, a blood-stained apron, and a medical education based mostly on trial and error. Yes, that was the barber surgeon, a legendary figure who was part healer, part blade enthusiast, and completely uncertified. Back then, the concept of a hospital was extremely loose. The only medical facility in many places was a makeshift infirmary run by a monastery, furnished with wooden beds, rough linen cloths, and a monk who doubled as a nurse, physician, and spiritual counselor. These facilities mostly cared for the poor, feverish pilgrims or farmhands who'd had unfortunate run-ins with their tools. And if you lived in a village, there was no such thing as a hospital. If something hurts, you deal with it, unless you know the local barber. Barbers in the Middle Ages didn't just cut hair or trim beards. They pulled teeth, lanced boils, drained pus, applied leeches, stitched wounds, delivered babies, and, if time allowed, performed acupuncture with needles made from, say, chicken bones. All of this was done with a few razor blades, a moderately clean cloth, and a bottomless supply of optimism. Usually people only went to the barber when they ran out of options. For example, you've had a toothache for 3 days, tried swishing wine, rinsing with ash water, praying and cursing. Still in pain? You sit in the barber's chair. He dips his fingers in vinegar, shakes his head and says, "This one needs to come out." No anesthesia, no painkillers. You bite down on a cloth, whisper a prayer, and then hear a loud crack, in the most literal sense. Or maybe you've been running a fever. The barber recommends a popular remedy, bloodletting. Medieval people believed the body contained 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness came from an imbalance between them, and the fastest way to restore balance? Drain some blood. Yes, you're already weak and feverish, so they take another half-liter of your blood and say, "Rest now, you'll feel better tomorrow." Bloodletting could be done with razors, hollowed-out horns, or, more charmingly, with leeches. Some folks specialized in raising leeches for sale to barbers. These fat little critters were placed on your skin to do their work while you stared at the wall and tried not to think about reality. A leech falling off was considered the signal of just the right amount. People believed they'd feel better afterward, or at least be too tired to complain. Barbers were also tasked with removing things that didn't belong anymore: boils, cysts, and, in emergencies, gangrenous fingers. The razor was sterilized with fire. Everything happened quickly, decisively, and sometimes memorably. Success depended on the barber's experience and your pain tolerance. Not all barbers were terrifying, though. Many were highly skilled, part of family traditions passed down through generations, and trusted more than actual healers. They could trim a beard, treat a sprain with herbs, massage away shoulder pain, pop a dislocated joint back in place, and sometimes even read a bit of Latin from old medical scrolls. These were the dedicated barbers, skilled, respected, and perhaps even certified by a distant monastery 4 days' ride away. Beyond the barber, patients might also seek help from the village healer, usually an older woman living in the woods or on the edge of town, a keeper of ancient herbal wisdom. She used roots, dried leaves, clay, dead bees, powdered charcoal, and spring water collected under a full moon. Some called her a witch. Others said she was the only one in the village who could cure a cold with thick turnip soup. Medieval people didn't have immune systems like we do today, but they had fierce faith that something was bound to work if they tried enough things: wine, ash, bull urine, or a reversed curse. And if it didn't, they'd have a good story when they recovered from something else. So, even without modern hospitals, medieval people survived plagues, injuries, toothaches, back pain, and even heartbreak. They got by on patchwork remedies, word of mouth, and a community where the barber was the doctor The healer was your neighbor, and leeches were practically family. They weren't afraid of blood. The only thing they feared was a non-existent bill. Back then, healing was part of life, not a line item in the budget. If you think medieval people didn't care about their appearance because they were too busy harvesting wheat, feeding pigs, and surviving winter, think again. They might not have had moisturizer, lip balm, or bathrooms with LED mirrors, but they still gazed into cloudy bronze mirrors and whispered, "I guess I look better than yesterday." Even amid dirt, sweat, and wood smoke, medieval folks knew how to beautify themselves. The only catch? Their beauty standards might leave you wide-eyed and spitting out your evening tea. Let's start with pale skin. You were considered common if you were tanned from working under the sun. Nobles were expected to be pale, pale as flour and candle wax, pale enough to scare chickens out of the yard. So, women used lead-based powder. Yes, real lead, the kind modern science begs you to avoid at all costs. This powder was mixed with vinegar and applied with fingers or a soft cloth. Over time, it created a smooth, ghostly finish, along with itching, peeling, rashes, and even skin loss. But if anyone asked, you simply said, "Beauty has its price." It was an era when vanity cost you a few layers of epidermis. Beyond pale skin, high foreheads were in. People believed a wide forehead signaled intelligence and virtue. So, women plucked their hairlines or shaved their temples to make their foreheads appear larger. Some went so far you couldn't tell where the forehead ended and the scalp began. But they were proud, because beauty sometimes demanded permanent sacrifice. Eyebrows? Not necessary. Long lashes? Not a priority. But blonde hair. Oh, blonde hair was the dream. If you weren't born with straw-colored locks, you could bleach your hair with fermented urine. Yes, really. Or use herbal mixtures combined with sunlight to encourage lightening. Some noble women spent hours sitting under a sheer veil on their porches, waiting for the sun to work its magic. Cloudy days? Well, then your hair would turn a patient gray. Wigs were also popular. Real hair was cut, braided, and attached to your hair with pins, linen strips, or homemade glue from boiled flour. The wealthy hired people to style their wigs before parties. The less fortunate borrowed their sister's hair. Lending your hair was as intimate as sharing a wedding dress, touching but a little risky. Eye makeup wasn't bold like today's smoky eyes. There were no liquid eyeliners or waterproof mascaras. Instead, people ground charcoal, mixed it with water or vinegar, and dabbed it on their lashes and eyelids using tiny brushes. If your hand shook, you looked like you'd wept for hours. But done right, your gaze was as mysterious as candlelight in a clay jar. Lip color? Rare, but not unheard of. People used beet juice, crushed berries, or a mix of wine and plant roots to tint their lips. The color faded quickly, so it had to be reapplied often. Some noble women were so skilled they could reapply lipstick even while seated near the toilet, besides a wooden bucket that didn't smell great, but that didn't stop them from looking radiant, anytime, anywhere. Men groomed too, not with elaborate makeup, but with serious care for their hair and beards. A neatly trimmed beard styled after a famous knight or king was a point of pride. Some men used scented oils made from sheep fat and herbs to style their beards and mask whatever they'd spilled during lunch. Perfume was essential. The most popular types were made from roses, lavender, musk, and citrus peels. It was dabbed behind the ears, wrists, or even on the hem of a skirt so that each step leaves a trace of fragrance. Some meticulous ladies perfumed their hairbrushes so their locks would smell divine with every stroke. And if someone noticed your scent, you had officially won the olfactory battle. Hands and nails mattered too. A noble hand was pale, slim, and callus-free. So women wore gloves or rubbed a mix of crushed pearls and honey into their skin. The result? Smooth hands, assuming the honey didn't attract ants first. In the end, medieval beauty was often hidden behind veils and curtains. Women didn't show everything. They left room for imagination. A flash of white forehead, a glimpse of golden hair, a hint of red lips. Men didn't fall in love because they saw everything. They fell because they saw just enough to wonder. Medieval beauty was an art form, sometimes dangerous, bizarre, and frequently fragrant in strange ways. But everyone deserved to feel beautiful in a world of mud, wind, and wood ash. Even if just for one evening, by candlelight, under a layer of lead powder, after hearing someone say, "You're even paler than yesterday." Imagine living in medieval times, feasting at a lavish castle banquet, with laughter echoing through the hall. You, yes, you, turn to smile at the person across from you. If you're lucky, you flash a set of even white teeth, or at least enough. If not, well, you might make them drop their ale because your smile reminds them of the rusted rake in Aunt Hilda's goat shed. Medieval dental hygiene was equal parts amusing, painful, and occasionally terrifying. There was no toothpaste, no soft bristled brushes, and certainly no friendly dentist handing you a lollipop after your visit. But strangely, not everyone had rotting teeth. Thanks to some unexpected methods, many people kept enough chompers to chew goat meat and flash a charming grin. First, the trusty tooth twig. Medieval folks used slender sticks, often from hazel, hawthorn, or rosemary, whittled to a point and chewed until the end frayed, forming a mini natural brush. They would then scrub their teeth, not with the gentle circular strokes your modern dentist recommends, but more like the harder it hurts, the cleaner it gets. Some also wrapped linen cloth around a finger, dipped it in wood ash, and rubbed it along their teeth. Ash had mild alkaline properties, helping to scrub plaque and kill bacteria, and slowly wear away enamel. Wealthier families mixed ash with sea salt, crushed eggshells, and a drop of mint oil to create a premium cleaning powder, which left their teeth whiter, but their nerves screaming. Mouthwash? Think strong liquor or apple cider vinegar. The sensation was like kissing a small torch, but at least it killed the garlic breath from your barley porridge. Some gentlemen chewed cloves, mint leaves, or licorice root to freshen their breath, especially handy if you wanted to whisper something sweet to someone at the fair without making them faint. Toothaches? No one admired your pain tolerance. If a tooth began to throb, there was no anesthesia. Your choices were to swish strong alcohol until you forgot you had a mouth, or visit the local barber/dentist mentioned in a previous chapter. The procedure? Sit on a stool, get tied to a post, count to 3, and yank. And the tooth? Leave it under your pillow, but don't expect the tooth fairy to swing by. Some folk healers made homemade remedies by packing herbal paste and wine into the cavity. Others tried dead bees soaked in alcohol, hot tree resin, or clay, plugging the hole and praying the patient lived long enough to see results. Did it work? Maybe not, but it certainly distracted you from the pain, because now you were worried about what else they'd try. In monasteries, monks maintained stricter oral routines. They rinsed with herbal infusions, chewed rosemary after meals, and recorded holy mouth rinses recipes in medical manuscripts. These usually began with, "Take some clean ash," and ended with, "Pray before use." Diet played a major role. Medieval people consumed far less sugar than we did. No candy, soda, cookies, or bubble tea. Sugar was a luxury, mostly for nobles. Commoners ate coarse grains, root vegetables, roasted meats, and sour dairy. These foods were less likely to rot teeth, and some even helped clean them when chewed thoroughly. Chewing stale rye bread could scrape away plaque more effectively than a modern silicone brush. Still, not everyone was lucky. Some smiles were downright hazardous. Crooked teeth, blackened from smoke, jagged like termite-eaten picket fences. Yet, in that society, no one lost confidence in it. As long as you could eat roast mutton, play a flute, or whistle for the chickens, you were considered dentally stable. And in the fine art of medieval flirting, the closed-mouth smile was a reliable weapon. There are no gleaming white grins like in toothpaste ads today. Just a slight curve of the lips, a head tilt, and a sparkle in the eye, enough to make someone forget you hadn't brushed in 2 weeks. Medieval folks understood that smiles didn't come from perfect teeth, but from a resilient spirit. Someone who could laugh in the rain, chuckle after dropping their bread in the mud, or grin through the pain as their tooth was pulled with rusty pliers. And if you could manage a smile in the middle of all that, congratulations, you just passed the 13th century dental exam with honors. You might think that love in the Middle Ages began with a dreamy gaze under the moonlight, a tender poem, or a wildflower pressed between the pages of a prayer book. But in many villages, foot odor was the first determining whether a marriage should happen. Sounds ridiculous? Picture this: no private bathrooms, breathable cotton socks, or ventilated sneakers. Footwear back then was made of raw leather or cloth, soaked in mud when it rained, soaked in sweat when it didn't. Socks were hand-knit from wool, hard to wash, and often reused. Now you get it. A pair of clean, sweet-smelling feet in medieval times was a declaration. I have discipline and self-respect, and I won't make the one I love suffer my stench. The practice of checking foot odor before marriage wasn't some made-up myth. In certain regions, especially in Central Europe and Scandinavia, there were customs where a girl would quietly observe the shoes of her suitor. He earned points if he left his boots to dry near the fire, sprinkled ashes inside to absorb moisture, and didn't make the family back away when removing them. If not, back to square one, starting with laundry day. In some places, engagement rituals even included a public foot washing ceremony. It's not quite as romantic as the movies. It involves the girl washing the boy's feet before family members. The goal wasn't just to show affection, but to inspect. Are the soles cracked? Are the toenails foul? Most importantly, is there a suspicious smell? If all went well, the wedding was on. If not, the girl's father might say, "My daughter deserves better feet." Of course, men weren't the only ones judged. Women also had to keep their feet tidy, or at least not turn them into wildlife habitats. Mothers often reminded their daughters, "A man can live with a poor wife, but not a stinky-footed one." The more meticulous women soaked their feet in warm herb water, trimmed their nails with a small knife, and sprinkled dry ash into their shoes as a prehistoric deodorant. Beyond odor, feet were a fitness indicator. A person with firm, blister-free feet and minimal calluses was seen as someone who walked properly and worked hard without being sloppy. Someone with cracked heels, bruised toes, or discolored nails might be suspected of having stepped into something unpleasant. For the nobility, foot odor wasn't as obvious. They walked less and had servants clean their shoes. But they had their fear: foot smell in the ballroom. Imagine dancing with a countess by candlelight, hand in hand, stepping to the rhythm of a lute. And then, a small draft from under her skirt brings everything to a sudden, suspicious halt. So noble ladies used scented powders, dried herbs, or perfumes in their shoes. Some placed lavender blossoms on their heels. Gentlemen often lined their shoes with linen soaked in herbal oil, or, if they wanted to show off, flipped their shoes to reveal insoles embroidered with angels and scented with citrus and virtue. Foot odor could even affect long-term relationships. Some believed that if you could sleep beside someone without being woken by the smell of their feet each morning, then that was the person you should marry. One folk saying went, "If the feet stay fresh through 2 seasons, marry without question." Silly? Maybe. But it was a perfectly reasonable standard in a world without foot spray. Some monks even wrote little books on foot hygiene, calling it the foundation of morality. They preached that those who live clean from heel to toe are honest. This led many devout churchgoers to remove their shoes and wash their feet after confession, not because of doctrine but out of pity for the priest. And there were love stories that began with nothing more than a neatly placed pair of shoes on a doorstep. A girl might leave a sprig of rosemary inside, and the boy would quietly set a clean pebble beside them. No letters, no poetry, just shoes that didn't stink. If you think living with strangers is hard, imagine living with your extended family across 3 generations, a few chickens, a pig, and sometimes even a neighbor crashing for the night, all sharing the same wash basin. Yes, personal space was just a concept in the Middle Ages. Houses were small, people were many. Livestock was just as numerous, and every morning began with a chaotic dance of breakfast making, changing clothes, putting on shoes, arguing, and fighting over the wash basin. A typical peasant home had one main room, a place to eat, sleep, cook, and pray, all within the same space. If the family was well off, they might have a loft where older people or children slept. Not for privacy, but because there were fewer rats up there. Personal hygiene, therefore, became a group activity. The wash basin sat in a corner of the house, near the hearth or a window for light, and to let the breeze carry away the smell. Water was poured in from a wooden bucket, and whoever got there first washed. After they were done, the next person reused the same water. Unless it smelled odd, it might be dumped. Washing hands before meals? Yes, but all in the same basin, dried with the same towel, and with a hopeful prayer that the first person had clean hands. Bathing required the whole household to plan. If the day was sunny, there was extra firewood, and the mood was right. They would boil a big pot of water and pour it into a wooden tub in the middle of the house. The children bathed first, because they were small and easy to grab. The adults followed, all in the same water. When the last person arrived, the water looked like cabbage soup and smelled like the entire family. But no one complained. They called it the scent of home. Undressing offered little privacy. Children ran around naked, no big deal. Adults changed clothes behind a flimsy curtain or simply turned their backs. Everyone learned to look the other way and respect each other by politely pretending not to notice. And if you accidentally looked, offer a quick apology and pour the person a drink to smooth things. Toileting was even more interesting. There were no indoor bathrooms, just a wooden bucket lined with straw placed near the pigsty, or an outdoor latrine for the lucky ones. A hole with a lid. Walking out in winter was a spiritual trial. So many people used chamber pots and dumped them in the garden at dawn. No judgment, everyone did it. There was an unspoken rule. Whoever empties the pot gets to sit closest to the fire at breakfast. Face towels were rare. Each person had one, or didn't. Some families shared a single towel hung on a wooden peg. When someone was done, they'd hang it back. No one asked, "Is it clean?" Because the answer wouldn't help. Bath towels were usually old rags or recycled clothing. Anything that could soak up water. Oral hygiene, as mentioned in an earlier part, was a quiet ritual. Adults scrubbed their teeth with their fingers and fireplace ash. Kids copied them. Some people rinsed their mouths with spring water and spat it out in the backyard, where chickens eagerly rushed to drink. A natural cycle no one questioned. Then there were noises. Sighs, hiccups, cracking voices, sneezes, or uninvited sounds from lower regions were inevitable in a house full of people. People learned to pretend they didn't hear. If kids laughed, they'd be scolded. "That'll be you one day." Elderly folks took pride. "Sounds like that mean the gut's still working." And yet, through all this inconvenience, there was a strange closeness. Sharing space meant knowing one another deeply. You knew who snored, who sleepwalked, and who always said, "Let me do it," but never did. You knew Grandma liked to wipe her hands with her old silk scarf, and that your cousin always hid behind the door during bath time. Family bonds were forged in that intimacy, through smells, sounds, and a few scratches on the wooden floor. When someone married, they might move out, which meant building a small extra room next to the original house. It's not real privacy, but at least they could hang up a towel and not have it stolen. Otherwise, people lived together, shared every spoonful, every tub of water, and every little secret, like who was the last person to hide bread under the straw mattress. Have you ever walked past a place and thought, "Oh, this smell is familiar"? In the Middle Ages, that feeling happened all the time, because every village, every town, and every street had its distinct scent. And no, it wasn't the kind of fresh countryside breeze filled with flowers like in fairy tales. The smell of a medieval village was a chaotic symphony of wood ash, sheep wool, dried fish, fermented grass, unwashed feet, rotting vegetables, a bit of chicken poop, and, if the village had a market, the sharp tang of fresh blood from the butcher's stall. All of it mixed into a recipe no chef would ever want to write down. Villagers didn't notice it. They lived in it every day, from when they opened their eyes to when they crawled under blankets beside the pigsty. They only felt something was off when they visited another village. For example, Someone from Village A might say, Village B smells like fish. And someone from Village B would reply, Village A smells like someone boiled onions in a well for 3 years. But all smells were the same. It just depended on what your nose was used to. Each village had a scent highway, usually the main road leading to the market. This was where all the strongest smells gathered. The blacksmith's forge with burning metal, the tanner's stall with wet leather and lime, the fish stand with barely thawed chunks, and the cheese booth where dairy sat out all day. Walking down this road was like taking a nose tour. One you probably wouldn't want to take again. Every trade had its own signature smell. Bakers carried the scent of flour and yeast, but you'd catch a whiff of smoky firewood up close. Shepherds reeked of damp wool and dry dung. The herb seller smelled of mint and sweaty backs. And the manure collector? Living proof that if you're used to it, you stop noticing. Even children could be identified by scent. A kid who waited in the fields all day smelled like mud and snails. One who played in the pig pen carried the perfume of fermented feed. Their mothers could tell instantly. No questions needed. Sniffing a shirt was how they knew where their child had been, what they'd eaten, and whether the laundry should go straight into the lye bucket. Inside the home, smells came from 3 main sources: the hearth, the straw bedding, and the animals. The hearth gave off smoke, ash, charred bread, and occasionally the scent of singed chicken feathers. The straw mattress held onto sweat, dust, and sometimes a child's nighttime accident. The animals contributed with breath, burps, and little gifts under the table every morning. Some villages tried to freshen the air by hanging herbs around wells, scattering ash at the gate, or burning mugwort in the evening. But the effect usually lasted until dinner time, when everyone lit their hearths, roasted onions, blew smoke, and created a whole new layer of smell, dense and sweet in a very acquired way. During festivals, villages would beautify the smell by scattering dried flower petals, burning scented candles, and hanging fragrant cloth flags. But you could still catch a whiff of damp socks from the dancers. And if there was a singing contest, whoever stood near the drum, the medieval speaker system, had to breathe very slowly, surrounded by the musk of 20 excited armpits. Visitors were often overwhelmed by the smells and how unbothered the locals were. They kept chatting while picking dirt from between their toes with chopsticks. They laughed while scraping dry mud off their tunics. And they invited you to dinner in homes that smelled like a hearty stew of everything they'd ever owned. Strangely enough, after a few days, you started to adjust. Your nose recalibrated, and by the time you leave, you might even find yourself missing it. Because smells are memories, they linger deeper than images. The scent of a village was the scent of life. Lived closely, simply, surrounded by nature and loved ones. It smelled of shared meals, laundry done together, and beds warmed by breath. The smell of a community, not spotless, but real with every breath you took. And one day, if you ever catch the scent of wood smoke, burnt bread, or damp wool drying on a line, you might smile without knowing why. Because somewhere, in a sleepy dream, you've just returned to the village the whole world could recognize by nose alone. The human body is a talking creature. But in the Middle Ages, it didn't whisper politely. It screamed. It shouted. It sent signals in every possible way, through smell, sound, rashes, and unwelcome little guests, like lice, fleas, mites, and the itchiest cast of characters in history. In that world, you didn't have skin issues. You had a body that was actively alive. If you were itchy, that wasn't unusual. On the contrary, if you weren't scratchy, people might ask, wait, don't you work in the fields? Sweat, dust, thick clothing, and infrequent bathing created the perfect habitat for all things tiny and legged to thrive. Let's start with sweat, your loyal companion from the pigsty to the church. Summer sweat, firewood hauling sweat, the kind you earned after walking 5 miles in leather shoes. Medieval people wore many layers, linen underneath, wool on top, and heavy cloaks. Sweating was inevitable. Some even called it nature's holy cleanser. But sweat didn't just bring smell. It made your skin damp, sticky, and more inviting to lice than a feast at the village fair. Lice lived in fabric, shirts, blankets, straw mattresses, and didn't wait for an invitation. An ordinary person might be hosting dozens without knowing. When the itch set in, they'd just quietly scratch and switch to another shirt, which probably had lice too. Lice claimed the scalp. Children got them the most. They played near the chicken coop, rolled in hay, then crawled into the family bed. It took just a few days for lice to conquer the entire head. The solution? Thick-toothed bone combs, careful strand-by-strand grooming, or soaking the head in a bitter mugwort infusion, hoping the lice would hate the taste. But the most effective remedy? Shaving the head. Many monks did it for religious reasons, but didn't want to get clawed while preaching. Children were often shaved too, and then made to wear fabric caps. It looked stylish from afar, but was a fashionable anti-lice defense. Itching was a constant condition. You could itch from dust, lice, dry skin, or wearing a wool shirt that hadn't been washed in 2 weeks. Medieval folks were used to scratching, publicly, privately, with fingers, wooden spoons, or the handle of a hoe if handy. Scratching without disrupting conversation was considered a high-level social skill. Some even invented back scratchers, long wooden sticks with hooks. These tools were hung by the door, free for anyone passing by to borrow. And if you're thinking of germs, sorry, that concept hasn't been invented yet. People only thought, if it feels good, it's a genius invention. Some mixed fireplace ash with vinegar to wash itchy spots, hoping the mild acid and deodorizing power would scare the tiny squatters away. Others applied mugwort, rosemary leaves, or cool clay to soothe the skin. And if none worked, they'd just remove their shirt, scratch until satisfied, and then put on a new one to begin the cycle again. Elders often reminisced, "Back in my day, we had contests to see who could find the most lice by sunset. The winner got extra bread." They'd even name the biggest lice. Some kept special ones, like pets, in small wooden boxes. It sounds gross, but it's true. If you live with something long enough, you start to care for it a little. Pets didn't help. A dog sleeping in the bed brought fleas. A cat rolling in straw and jumping on your blanket meant the whole family would be itchy. But no one kicked them out. In winter, they keep you warm. In summer, they lifted your spirits. If someone scratched the cat, they'd laugh and say, "At least it didn't claw me." There were nights when the whole household lay side by side, scratching, storytelling, and yawning. No one complained. The itching was part of life, like hunger, cold, or the smell of feet after a festival. Knowing when to scratch, not breaking the skin, and not accidentally clawing someone else's leg while sleep twitching mattered. Medieval people weren't clean by today's standards, but had remarkable adaptability. Their bodies learned to endure. Their minds learned to ignore. And in every itch, every wandering louse, they still laughed, lived, and loved. Maybe right after scratching their head. You can wash your face every morning, do weekly laundry, and bathe once every full moon. But some things cling to your body that no soap can scrub away. In the Middle Ages, those things were memories. Scars, calluses, scents, even how you sat down to rest. All told stories the mouth never needed to speak. Let's start with scars. Scars back then weren't something to hide. On the contrary, they were like medals, proof that you had lived, fallen, gotten back up, and kept going. A long cut across your arm, maybe from a sickle slipping during a bad harvest. A faint dent on your forehead, from when you ran head first into a well chasing a rooster as a child. That small nick below your ear? The result is a heated argument with your cousin over the last piece of cheese. Men proudly showed off their scars by the fireside. They'd point to their knees and retell the time they were dragged through the fields by an angry ox, still chewing bread and laughing like it was a comedy. Women remembered their scars with their hands, the calluses on their wrists from chopping kindling, the blisters on their feet after running across the village during their sister's wedding, or the bite mark from a newborn nursing a bit too enthusiastically. Calluses had their own stories. Rough hands meant you worked hard, told the truth, and weren't afraid to get dirty. Cracked feet showed that you'd walked far, across markets, forests, and over dewy meadows. Some even had toes permanently bent to the side. A decade of squeezing into shoes inherited from your grandfather left its mark. And of course, scent was perhaps the most intimate memory. Everyone had their smell, not just the smell of sweat. It was the smell of the wood you carved, the animals you held, the herbs you picked to wash your hands. A baker smelled faintly of sourdough and yeast. A beekeeper carried traces of smoke and wax. A fisherman always had a whiff of sea wind, even when standing deep in the woods. That scent couldn't be washed off. It lived in your hair, clothes, hands, and in the memory of others. Some children grew up to find that just one whiff of damp earth brought them back to evenings curled up in their grandmother's lap, listening to stories of a fox who lost its tail from laughing too hard as it slid into a river. The scent became part of who you were. Someone once said, "I know my wife has come home from the sound of her clogs, but I know if she's sad or happy from her scent." And that wasn't wrong. When she was tired, there was a stronger scent of herbal tea. When she was joyful, it smelled like half-baked pastries. No need for words. Just a whiff was enough. Even posture carried memory. Someone who once plowed fields walked with a slight hunch. Someone who had climbed mountains stood with grounded confidence. A former shepherd had a step that bent with the wind. The body remembered how you lived and silently performed it every day, even if you weren't aware of it. There were no cameras in medieval times, no digital journals, but everyone carried a living scrapbook, their body. Someone who had broken an arm might wince when changing clothes. Someone who had once been feverish flinched a little in the cold wind. Someone who had loved and lost stared blankly into the fire come autumn. Some even carried small pouches with pieces of their past, a strip of cloth from their mother's dress, a pebble from their first day of work, or a lock of hair from someone now gone. These things weren't washed. They didn't need to be. They existed as extensions of memory, reminding you that you once laughed, cried, and truly lived. You might go a month without bathing, but the callus on your hand would still tell the story of the spring day you swam across the river to rescue a lost sheep. The scar on your shoulder would still indicate when you stood your ground against a furious bull. And if someone sat close enough, they might catch a faint whiff of dried mint leaves, the trace of evenings spent quietly brewing tea after the house had gone to sleep. Ultimately, your body is the only place you live from beginning to end. And while medieval folks didn't have spas, anti-aging creams, or high-resolution skin scanners, they understood that real beauty didn't come from being perfectly clean. It came from how many seasons you'd survived, how many wounds you'd carried, and whether, after it all, you were still gentle enough to smile at a stranger, even from inside 3 unwashed layers of wool. So after 29 parts, we've trudged through mud, straw, sweat, lice, and those unnamed horrors that lurk in the corners of medieval latrines. From the shared family wash basin to the communal wooden bathtub, from the back scratcher hanging by the door to foot odor as a proposal of marriage, we've lived a life, even if just in imagination, among people who had no hot water, no antibacterial soap, but a quiet resilience that still lingers in the air. Are you still awake? Or did you drift off somewhere around the scar on that poetic farmer's forehead? Either way, I'm still here, to walk with you to the end. The Middle Ages were not a clean age, but they were not meaningless. There was still love in the mildew, itch, and soot-stained breaths. There was laughter, glances exchanged across kitchen smoke, no makeup, no pressed collars, just half a loaf of bread shared and a common bowl of water to wipe the table. It was a world where every drop of sweat had a reason to exist. Fields needed plowing, wood needed chopping, and someone needed to stay warm on a winter night. Calloused hands were badges of sacrifice, where gifting someone a clean rag felt like a romantic gesture, and sitting close to the fire was a reward for a day that wore your name away.